が呼んでいた声が聞こえてた空が呼んでいる声が聞こえてる静寂の中に一筋の
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. It is part 6 of our journey through Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin. On our Weekly Suit Gundam topic, you will hear us talk about the 6th and final part of the OVA series, Gundam The Origin, Rise of the Red Comet. It's another good one. It's another good conversation. We've already had it, so we know it was good.
Yes, it's very good.
And then, but before we get to Gundam, we will also have some news, including our reactions to some trailers that we got from the last week, including The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. I'm really excited for it. Some movie news, some gaming news. It'll be fun, and I have some fun stuff at the top for us. But Sean, how have you been?
I've been pretty good, you know. It's been a good period here where... So Horizon Forbidden West just came out, but I haven't bought it because I'm going to wait on that one until after Elden Ring, because Horizon, as is its fate seems to be, it has to release 1 week before whatever like the projected best game of the year is, because it was the exact same thing with Breath of the Wild. It came out 1 week before that. This year it's 1 week before Elden Ring, so I'm gonna wait, play Elden Ring, and then go back to Forbidden West. That means that there was this nice little week of time where I was like, oh, like instead of playing Forbidden West, I can play whatever. And that also happens to be right when the Genshin Impact update dropped. So I'm like, well, Great. This is a good time to continue my, just what my life is and has been for over a year now, which is just Genshin Impact all day, every day. And this has been a very good update. And that's basically what I've been doing for the past week.
Let's hold on Genshin, because I've been mainlining it too, and I do want to... Let's, maybe after the news, maybe we do a Genshin topic really quick.
Okay.
And just talk about what's new in that update, because it was a deceptively big update. There's really good stuff in it.
Yeah, there was more to it than I expected. Yeah.
The only thing I haven't finished is the Yae Miko story, but I've played everything else extensively. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I do have 2 quick pieces of housekeeping. First up, the Persona 5 Royal podcast, the complete spoiler cast, the 15-hour behemoth, is now out in your feeds. It's up on YouTube in 2 parts. Getting it into the podcast feed, Sean, was actually a week-long journey between me and our podcast provider, which is Simplecast. And I want to give a shout-out to their customer service for responding with a stone face to my absolutely ridiculous request. I need to upload a 15-hour episode, and it's not working. Because in the upload process, it was getting stuck at, basically you upload your audio file and it does a quick check, and then you're able to post everything. It was on that check stage, it was getting stuck. And so I had to email out, and I went, my first email was, I was kind of playing it coy, like, it's extra long, I don't know if that's a problem. And they're like, it shouldn't be a problem. And finally, when they dig in and looked at it, there was a thing on their back end where, for the little mini player, it generates waveforms. And the episode was so long, it was breaking the waveform process. So they had to go in through I had to give them the file. They had to go in through the back end and have it upload and turn off the waveform process. And that is why it is now out on your feeds. But it took, we broke part of their back end. And I think that's very funny.
That is very good. Did they make the very reasonable request of, why not just make it like 2 or 3 parts?
No,
of course it originally was, but
no. I have been a paying customer for many years, and they're pretty good to customers. I will say their customer support is very, very good. But I was impressed that there was no blinking. It was just, we're gonna help you upload this 15-hour episode, you goddamn idiot. I assume is what they didn't say, but yeah.
That's very professional, because if I was working that job, I think it'd be impossible not to just be like, why not just make it like 3? Like, I don't know what the fuck you're doing that you're uploading a 15-hour long podcast, what your life is, but why not just make it like 3 parts or something?
Because that defeats it was already multiple parts, and then we put it all in one. That's the whole point.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, I understand that reason, but I just like to imagine the customer service person just being like, what the fuck is happening?
Yes. you know, it's a weird problem, but this is why I'm happy to work with an actual podcast platform and not... Back in the day, I did all this myself, and it sucked. But it's been a long time since then. Anyway, I also wanted to give a quick piece of housekeeping, because one of my pieces of stuff is I've started watching the second season of Kimetsu no Yaiba.
Yes, I'm only a little bit into it because of my obsessive Genshin Impact playing.
Yes.
But yes, I've also started watching that as well.
I watched the whole Mugen Train arc where they re-edited the movie, and I'm a couple episodes into the second season proper, the Entertainment District arc. That will be next week's topic, so we will talk about that next week. We will do a full Kimetsu no Yaiba Season 2 episode. People have been asking about it. Now that the season is over, it wrapped last week, we will talk about it. It's very good.
Yes, yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I'm not yet out of the Mugen. I'm basically like 2 episodes away from finishing the Mugen Train stuff. But so far it's like, yes, this is Kimetsu no Yaiba. It's good.
Yes.
I'm very excited to get to the new stuff.
It's so fucking good, Sean. Anyway, we will talk about that next week. But Sean, I do have one piece of stuff I want to talk about.
Okay.
I think I hinted at this a week or two ago. I did finally bite the bullet, and I bought the Nintendo Switch OLED model. Upgraded my Switch. My Nintendo Switch is I have had the same Switch since launch day, so it has lasted almost 5 years. March 2022 will be the 5th anniversary of that thing. So it lasted basically for me a full 5 years. It's still in good working order. I'm gonna sell it, and I have no qualms about that. It's the battery life is getting a little bad, but it's fine other than that. I mean, obviously I had to replace the Joy-Cons long ago because they're pieces of shit, but that's a whole other conversation. So, one, I just want to say, the base model Nintendo Switch, easily the best base model of a handheld they've ever had, because the base model GBA, and the base model DS, and the base model 3DS, those were all, as soon as there was an upgrade available, dear God, please let me upgrade, because they were bad. Even the original Game Boy, we remember it fondly, but it was a piece of shit. The Game Boy Pocket was so much better. The Game Boy Color... The original Game Boy sucked. That fucking green screen. But I have finally decided to upgrade, and I got it in today. It was supposed to come in yesterday to Best Buy. I even went over there because they told me it was ready Saturday. They were like, "Oh, we don't have it." I left, and then about an hour later, I got the email that it was ready. But then it was 10 minutes before they closed, and I couldn't get back in time. So that was a weird saga at Best Buy yesterday. But I went and picked it up this morning before the podcast because we were going to be podcasting all day after that. So I picked it up. I have spent the morning with it, Sean, and it's a great little device. I will talk about the actual quality of it later when I've had some more time with it. It's a great screen. It's a good upgrade, all of that. The kickstand, it literally like the polar qualitative opposite of the kickstand on the original Switch, because now it's basically just a Microsoft Surface kickstand, and it's good. But Sean, I need to do a little recurring segment of Jonathan talks about transferring data between Nintendo products. Okay. Because it's a fucking nightmare. Fucking nightmare. Sean, I went back and looked. We have had multiple ones on this. We've done it on the 3DS before, but I was looking back on this. Do you remember when we did the whole fucking episode about me transferring from Wii to Wii U and what a nightmare that was?
Yes, I don't remember any of the details of the conversation, but I just remember, like, when you say, like, transferring data, I just, like, my heart lights up because I remember how fucking hilarious it was. Like, I need to go back and re-listen to that episode because I just remember it being just utterly ridiculous.
That was episode 79 from March 2014. Almost. That was 8 years ago, Sean.
Jesus.
Oh my god. Anyway... But now, I've done it with the Nintendo Switch. Somehow, it might be even worse. It might be even worse now, and I don't know how that's possible. Because to recap, let's say you have 2 Xboxes and you want to switch between them. Here's what you do. You sign into the new Xbox. That's it. That's the only step. That's the full thing. And then if you have a hard drive, you just plug it in. And if you don't, you re-download, and that's it. That's the only step. PS5 can be a little more convoluted in places because save data doesn't work as smoothly, but mostly it's the same.
Yeah, basically with almost any device, with anything, and also this has been true for like, what, maybe 15 years at this point, it is just, you have an account, your account is not tied to any physical thing because it's just a digital account, and you just sign into your account on the device you want to use it. And that's it. And it's just been like that with almost every single thing you use in your entire life for like 15 years. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. There are 3 stages to this, Sean, and I'm not done with all of them yet because I only had 2 hours this morning and that wasn't enough to finish it.
Oh,
the fucking process. First off is transferring your user account and user data. So your save data, your user account, your like permissions, all of that stuff. It's not just sign in on the new system. It is a whole transfer process where you have to physically have both switches. You can't just go like to GameStop and trade in your Switch and get a new one and transfer. No, you have to have both of them physically. So what you do is you have to plug both of them in. So if you've got docks plugged in, you have to unplug the docks, get the AC adapter out, plug both of them in. It won't let you do it without them plugged in. You plug both of them in. You go through a whole convoluted process where on the source system, your original Switch, you go to the user account you want. You say, we're going to transfer it. You say, are you going to still be using this system? And you say, no, if you're not going to, and then it's going to like switch it all over and make the new system the like default and all of that and delete it from the original. So you say that, then you go on the new system, say, hey, I want to bring data over to this. And you have to sign in on both switches, all of that. Then it goes through a process. For me, it took about an hour to transfer the data from one to the other. I guess it does it over the internet. They both had to be plugged in, do all of that. Okay. You have to do it one account at a time. So if you have multiple accounts on your Switch, you have to go for every account and do this. I have 3 accounts on my Switch. I have me, I have Japanese me, in case I want to get Japanese games, and I have European me, in case I want to go to the European eShop. I decided I never use that European account. I don't remember what I made it for. This takes too long. So I did me and the Japanese me. I had long since forgotten the password for Japanese me. I had to figure all of that out. Got everything over. Okay, user data over. So that's step 1. Then I thought, okay, well, I have most of my Switch games data, like not the saves. The saves are stored on local, but the downloads and everything are on my SD card in here. So I'll take the SD card out of the original system, put it into my new OLED Switch, and then I'll be able to play all my games, right? Because it just transferred my user data, which has all my permissions, right? Mm-hmm. No. It does not transfer the permissions for the SD card. The SD card is tied to a physical Switch. When you format an SD card for a Switch, you cannot put it into another Switch without it formatting the SD card. So when you put in the new Switch, you put in the SD card to the new Switch, even though, again, I've transferred all my permissions over, it says, hey, you can't use this. We have to completely delete it. You can take it out now, or we're going to delete everything on it and format it. And I went, okay, let's figure this out. So I took it out, and then I went to my computer, and I transferred everything on the SD card to a hard drive. So I had the data. Then I put it back in the Switch OLED, formatted the SD card. Now I've got the SD card back in my computer, transferring all the data back onto the SD card. I hope this will work. I think it'll work. I'm not sure it will work. And I'm not sure because, Sean, right now there are still 2 hours remaining on that transfer because SD cards are very slow.
Okay, yes.
From the hard drive to the SD card. I haven't gotten to the step of putting the SD card back in the Switch OLED. If this doesn't work, I just need to re-download literally everything, and that'll be fun. Which also means I will have to put in every single game I have on a cartridge and check if it needs an upgrade. It's gonna be a whole thing. It's gonna be a blast.
Yeah, and I think it's probably like a coin flip. I think it's a 50-50 chance that it works, right? Because it seems like there's a pretty good chance that the Switch is just gonna go, nuh-uh. No boy.
Yeah.
Like I see what you tried to do here, but no, you can't do that.
Makes
you
makes too much sense.
The Switch. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, can you imagine that, Sean? If like when you got your PS5, if you plugged in your PS4 hard drive and it said, no, you got to format it. You gotta go cold turkey on this.
Yeah, like I remember when I got my fancy Spider-Man PS4 Pro, all I did was I just took the 2 terabyte hard drive I had upgraded my original PS4 hard drive with a 2 terabyte laptop drive. I took that out of my old PS5. I took the 500 gigabyte or whatever, I think it actually was a terabyte hard drive in the PS4 Pro, swapped them, turned on my PS4 Pro, signed into my PSN account, and then it was just, and that was it. Like the most complicated thing was just the fact that I had upgraded the internal storage, so I wanted to use the internal storage rather than if I had used an external hard drive, it would have just been plugging that into a USB port. I
have an external USB drive that I have used on my Xbox that I think I've used on 4 Xboxes, and it has never given me 1 ounce of guff. Just you plug it in and you use it. So, but no SD card. No, this is fuck you. Yeah, Nintendo's weird. But Sean, that is not the weirdest part of this process yet.
Okay.
The weirdest part is that this works for everything except there is one big, glaring exception to this entire process, and if you know it, you've been screaming it at the podcast this whole time, which is Animal Crossing New Horizons. The data for Animal Crossing New Horizons does not behave like anything else. It will not transfer off your Switch. It will not transfer via SD card. It will not transfer via cloud save. Here's, Sean, should I go through the list of steps? There is a list of steps for this. It is 16 steps long on the Nintendo support page. And that is after going through a multiple choice answer thing of what is your specific scenario. Here are the 16 steps.
Okay.
First off, you need to have the game on both systems. Fully downloaded, fully updated, you have to have it on both systems. I genuinely do not know what the process is if you own it on cartridge. I own the game on a download. I don't know what the process is on a cartridge.
Yeah, because I was going to ask. That's a shame because I would have loved to know. Are you just totally fucked? Do you have to buy that game again if you want to transfer it? Because if so, that is like some heinous bullshit.
Apparently, if you fuck this up, you can call Nintendo customer support and they will. It is in the cloud, and they will do it for you. You just can't access the cloud. It's weird. But okay, so Sean, here's what we got. So step 1, make sure Animal Crossing New Horizons is updated to the latest software version on your source system, so the system you're coming from. Then you have to go into the eShop and download the Island Transfer Tool, which is a separate application, like a separate game. Put that on your source system. Now, at that point is when you're supposed to transfer all of your user data. But I didn't know that, so I had already transferred my user data, which deletes my user data from the source system, which means I couldn't go... And also, I didn't have Animal Crossing in there anymore. I was going to have to re-download it because it's on the SD card that I'd taken out of the system. So I'm having to re-download it on the source system, but also, I don't have my account on the source system, so I can't download anything, so I have to re-link my account, which luckily doesn't unlink it from the other Switch, but I did have to re-link it on here. Then I download the Island Transfer Tool. That's how far I've gotten. I haven't done the rest of this yet because, again, I haven't had that much time, but let's go through. So, okay, you've transferred all your data, blah, blah, blah. Step 4, on the target system, the new system, you update Animal Crossing to the latest software version. So make sure you've got it over there, too. On the target system, download the Island Transfer Tool. All right, we've got the Island Transfer Tool on both systems. Now you open it on both systems. Step 7, follow the on-screen instructions, blah, blah, blah. On the source system, collect source. Step 9, confirm your island. On the target system, select target. On the source system, select continue. When the target system is detected, select transfer data on the source system. When the source system is detected, select proceed on the target system. 14, when the transfer is complete, a message will appear on both systems. 15, launch Animal Crossings on your new target system to continue playing on your island. And 16, if you previously set up Island Backup, follow our steps to set up Island Backup again to ensure that it is re-enabled on your new system.
So you have to, like, sit there with 2 Nintendo Switches, like, pressing all these buttons, like, confirming messages between the 2 of them to transfer your island data, and then make sure that you reset it up again in case, because we should also emphasize that this is an instance where, like, you have a fully working old Switch. You just wanted to upgrade to the newest model of a Switch. So... anyone who's in a even worse situation where, say, your Switch is stolen, say it gets broken somehow, and you thus can't just fuck around with it. Like, now you just have to go through their customer support and, like...
Hope it works.
Hope that they'll be generous this time and not think you're some sort of, like, Animal Crossing deviant who you're trying to... do something with Animal Crossing that is bad for some reason, and that's why we're so restrictive, but nobody could possibly articulate what that would be or why it would be bad, because there isn't some sort of evil scheme that one could commit to do great harm to the world through the fact that I have maybe the same Animal Crossing island on 2 Switches at the same time. Oh god.
What the fuck, Sean? What the fuck? The doing it for Animal Crossing is the weirdest thing. I've been playing Animal Crossing since the original game on GameCube. Do you know what it was on GameCube? You had a fucking memory card. On DS, it was the DS cartridge. On Wii, you just saved the data on the Wii. What the fuck is this shit? And it's the only game that you have to do that for. I don't even play Animal Crossing anymore, so honestly, my initial reaction was, okay, bye, villagers, I don't care. I'm gonna do it out of fucking spite because it's funny. But, like, what the hell? Why is it so goddamn hard to do this? It's 2022. Can you imagine, Sean, if every time you bought a new fucking iPhone, you had to have the old iPhone and you had to like be between them, and like what on earth? Apple would be out of business. Like that is just, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, the fact that they had to create like a unique app for Animal Crossing that is the like island transfer application that you need to like download and fuck with, that this game for whatever reason necessitates its own like secondary program for you to be able to install, is just complete madness. Like, as you say, it just like Nintendo just feels like they don't really understand the internet, and because they don't understand it, it scares them. I think they just don't realize that it's like there's no like worst case scenario. Like nothing's going to happen. That's like, I don't know what their like nightmare scenario they've concocted in their head possibly could be. That like, what is someone going to do with their Animal Crossing island? Like, are they going to cheat in Animal Crossing? They do it anyways with the fucking system clock and shit like that. Like, it's a single player game. Like, who fucking cares?
And if they do cheat, it's not an online game with like an economy. It doesn't fucking matter. It's Sean, I have been playing Nintendo since they started doing handhelds. My first Nintendo system was a Game Boy Color. I know this stuff. It has never, ever, ever, ever been as hard to move from one system to the other as it is on the Nintendo Switch, and that boggles my fucking mind. It boggles my mind that we are on episode 417 of this podcast, and I am describing a worse transfer process than I described on episode 79. What has happened to the fucking world, Sean? Jesus Christ.
I mean, I think it's just that they have the same, like, 2006 mindset that they had when they launched the Wii.
Yes.
But the world has become increasingly online since then. And so it's like they're approaching a bigger, more complex, more fully integrated digital environment with this, like, mid-2000s mindset that's like, oh, the internet, someone might do something with it. And so they just are scared and have never updated the way they think. So it's actually, in many ways, it's not surprising that it is getting more difficult, because there's never been a paradigm shift. It's always just been a couple of little tiny steps in, like, we'll do a DLC occasionally for some games, but Super Mario Maker 2, we'll do one update and fuck off Super Mario Maker 2, but we'll do 500 extra fighters for Super Smash Brothers. We'll do 1 billion tracks for Mario Kart, but release another map for Mario Party? That seems a bit fishy to us, right? Like, it's just, they're so weirdly inconsistent and bizarre with that stuff.
It sucks also because I will say, from my very limited experience with it so far, the Switch OLED is a unalloyed improvement if you play obviously, if you never intend to play handheld, don't get it. Like, if Sean, you were to buy a Switch, I would tell you go buy a used refurbished one or something, because you don't seem to want to play handheld. No. But if you do like it, like I do, and a lot of other people do, like, it's amazing. It's this, the funniest thing is it feels so much bigger. It's identical in proportions, but it feels bigger because the screen just now has completely taken over the bezels, so it feels much bigger. It's an OLED screen, obviously. Like, I've played a little bit of Breath of the Wild and maybe 20 minutes of the new Pokemon on it, and I mean, it's just an enormous improvement. Like, the richness of the colors on the system are incredible, all of that kind of stuff. The just the general build quality of it is better. The kickstand it's hilarious how much, because the old kickstand was the shittiest thing on any system ever. The new one is literally, it's just a Microsoft Surface kickstand, and like, those are good. Yep. So it's fine. But yeah, not fun to transfer.
No, yeah, that's, I'm looking forward to, episode 623 of this podcast, when, like, the Switch 2, like, Super HD OLED Plus is out, and you're like, oh, fuck, on my base Switch 2 version, I had to switch over, and, this time they made me, sacrifice a virgin sheep or some shit to, consume its blood in order to transfer my Animal Crossing island. It's like, I feel like they're going a bit far this time.
Okay, so Sean, I am breaking back in here just before we sign off, because as I told the listeners earlier, a lot of problems getting my Nintendo Switch stuff transferred. We had the whole saga of the SD card that was unfinished when we started recording, Sean, because the SD card was taking so long to transfer, and I was letting the data go while we were recording. But the data has finished, so I am going to insert my SD card into my Switch, the new one, and see if this actually works, if I actually get my data, or if it's going to erase it all again and just make me re-download 300 gigabytes worth of games. What do you think's going to happen? You want to put a bet down?
Like I said, I think what we're doing right here is we're flipping a coin. I'm going to go tails and say it doesn't work because pessimism very rarely, or if ever, treats me wrong.
All right. I think that's... Secretly, I agree with you, but I will go with, let's just hope it works. I will be the optimist in this scenario. I am turning on the Switch now. Here's the Nintendo logo.
Oh, man. The suspense.
This is... Very deep blacks on this screen because it's OLED. That's nice. All right. Pressing the button. Oh god. Oh god. It went to black as soon as it got to the menu, and now it is showing a notice that says unable to access microSD card. Please turn off the console and reinsert the microSD card.
Oh boy.
Okay.
So one of two things has happened here. Either somehow or I guess a couple things could have happened. Hopefully the microSD card is somehow broken. You didn't put it in all the way or something like that. You know, maybe it didn't click all the way. Or,
it is in a different spot. I wonder, or it corrupted the data. Yeah.
Or it's just like, yeah, you can't do this. You got to download this shit off this Switch, son. You can't get this off a computer. You're gonna cheat somehow. You're gonna make your Animal Crossing people level 500 because that's how that game works.
Oh god.
Oh, so you've put it back in.
I put it in right. It's put it back in. I'm starting again. Yeah, same thing. Just goes to black. Yep. Unable to access my microSD card. Well, okay. For now, I guess the answer is it doesn't work. I'll let you know if I can fix this next week. But that's it for now.
Fucking Nintendo, man.
You want to do some news?
Yeah, what's going on in the news, Jonathan?
So, I've been avoiding talking about this, but we finally got actual footage, so let's do it. Amazon has, over the last 2 weeks, given a trickle of information for their Lord of the Rings series, which, just to recap, they spent $500 million buying the rights for and have committed another, I think, $1 billion, I'm not exaggerating, to producing 5 seasons of. They have given it they gave it a 5-season order before they had hired a writer or a director or any creative people for it. It was just, we're going to do a Lord of the Rings thing. So they are deep. They are a, like, $1.5 billion deep in this fucking thing. We got some posters with, like, just the logo. Then we got some pictures from, like, Vanity Fair of all the, like, the young versions of the elves, which makes no sense because they're elves. They wouldn't be young. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then we finally got the trailer for The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. I didn't think it looked good. I don't know. What did you think?
I mean, I barely even remember what the trailer was. Like, yeah, it looks just kind of like generic to me. That's like, yeah. I don't, yeah, like it, I mean, part of it is like the trailer is just sort of like mostly a mood thing. You don't get a sense of like, what is the story that they're actually like really trying to tell. It's not like pitching a plot or anything like that. So it's kind of hard to come away from it with anything other than it looks like that kind of like store brand cereal thing where, you know, it's not like Fruity Loops, it's like apple circles or some shit, and it's like that but with the Lord of the Rings movies, right? Like it is gesturing towards some of the aesthetics that the Peter Jackson movies had, because that's what we think of when we think of Lord of the Rings, but it's obviously not the Peter Jackson movies, for lots of reasons, including rights stuff. So like it is definitely a weird thing of where you're like, oh, you want to evoke that, but you can't, but you aren't just that. And so it's just sort of this sort of like weird generic high fantasy looking show. Like it didn't make me have any sort of Lord of the Rings related feelings as a fan of that like franchise and the expanded Silmarillion and the appendices and all that kind of stuff, which I also really like. It didn't sort of hit me in any way.
I would definitely agree with that. It, you know, it looks, there are 2 shots in the trailer that are very clearly inspired by the Alan Lee illustrations from the books. Mm-hmm. And those looked nice. And everything else, it could have been for the Game of Thrones spinoff. It could have been for The Witcher Season 3. It could have been for any kind of the generic high fantasy things we have now. It did not look Lord of the Rings-y to me. It did not sound Lord of the Rings-y to me. It obviously does not gesture towards a plot, really. The plot that we seem to be getting is that this is a Second Age story about the creation of the Rings of Power, which, fine, except that's not a story that you can tell a TV season about. That's like thousands of years and hundreds of characters, and like there's no protagonist you would have in that story. There's a lot of very talented people working on this show behind the scenes, but like the showrunners are literally, they've never done a TV show before. This is their first thing. And maybe that's good. It could be bad. We'll see. My overall impression is that I kind of, even if it looked good, I can't shake off what a fucking cynical project it is, because it is Jeff Bezos swinging around his big money dick trying to make Amazon Prime Video happen. And like, who fucking cares? But like, I don't know. Nothing about it screamed Lord of the Rings to me, or the world of Tolkien, or any of that. I can't get over the stupidity of doing the, like, we're going to have an adventure with young Galadriel. I'm like, Galadriel is older than Middle-earth itself. What are you talking about, young Galadriel? Like, she would be younger, I guess, in that sense. She wouldn't look younger. And, like, to be fair, the actress they have playing Galadriel is about the age Cate Blanchett was in Fellowship of the Ring. But I do think she looks younger. Like, I feel like they cast someone who looks more... Like, for Elrond, they cast someone who looks more boyish, and I think for Galadriel, they cast someone who looks a little more like young adult, young woman-ish. I wouldn't say girlish, but like young woman-ish. And like, so there's this just feeling of like, this is the young adventurous versions of Elrond and Galadriel, and they look like they're going to start a folk band. And I don't know, that's dumb. I don't want to be mean, but that's dumb.
I think, like, my problem, and this is where, like, a trailer needs to do something to alleviate this, is that I just can't really conceive of what story they're going to tell and how they're going to make it good. Because I feel like if you're doing this sort of, like, Second Age era Lord of the Rings story, the only thing I can think of that would be a good TV show would be one that is an anthology show, right? It would just be totally episodic. Each episode would be its own thing. And it's just telling little short stories, adapting material that Tolkien did, because that's what a lot of that is, like, both in the appendices, in the Silmarillion, and then in, like, lots of other sort of, like, disparate writings, much of them published posthumously, that, like, you do get lots of cool little stories in the world of Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth that you could do an anthology show on. But I don't think they're doing an anthology show. They would have said if it was going to be an anthology show, and it feels like they're going to want to do the more modern TV serialized story thing and have like a main plot and a protagonist and like something that carries through the whole show. And I just don't know what you do with that and make it good, because you'd have to deviate so far from the source material and just be inventing stuff wholesale that a lot of it, you know, not necessarily tonally, but sort of conceptually, it makes me think of the Shadow of Mordor game. And that's like kind of what this has, is like this, like, you're just sort of taking this IP and just using like random bits and pieces of things from the lore from the IP, but you're basically just like inventing something brand new and just using the IP because it's what media is these days on a big scale, is just media companies buying up huge swaths of IP and just like saying, oh, IP is popular, IP makes money, therefore we will get the IP and we will use the IP in this very like corporate, we just need to produce the content through the IP brand sort of mindset. And that's the only thing I thought of when I was watching that trailer.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I can very easily imagine the interminable version of this that is a 10-hour slog with like a billion characters, and like every episode has, like, most of the episodes probably have no actual plot, but they like pretend like they move a little bit. Basically like Game of Thrones a lot of the time, and like just jumping around a ton. And I don't know, there is a stink of cynicism on the whole thing that I can't shake. And I don't know. It's a weird project. We'll see. It's so little to go on, but there had been enough of a trickle that I thought it would be fun to talk about for a second.
Yeah, like I'm curious I'm curious about it in the sense of like I'm academically curious in it, and like I'm interested to know exactly what they're going to do. But I definitely, like, this trailer didn't, like, the trailer just kind of meant nothing. So yeah. I'm still waiting for them to do, like, they need to make an actual pitch with like a real trailer, not a sort of little tease with young Elrond.
So I normally don't put on trailers on the outline much at all anymore, but I did also just want to say they did release a full trailer for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Uh-huh.
That movie looks really fucking good. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's a pretty kick-ass trailer.
It's a pretty kick-ass trailer. It's extremely, like, visually out there and adventurous, like, way more even than the first Doctor Strange was. It feels like Sam Raimi got to do his thing, and that's pretty cool to me.
Yes, and you've just got, like, Doctor Strange and then, like, an evil Doctor Strange from the Negaverse and shit. Like, it's like, you know, the teleporter went bad in Star Trek or something.
Yes.
There's, like, a zombie Doctor Strange in there. There's the Illuminati, which is a whole, like, Marvel thing of, like, the secret group of superheroes that, like, Iron Man is part of the original Illuminati. I assume he's probably not going to be in this movie. But that is kind of hinted at, and that is always the thing that I thought was fun that came around the Civil War era of the comics. That it seems like they're going to be playing with some of those ideas in some, like, parallel universe. It's just, yeah, it looks very, like, creatively invigorated with the giant, ridiculous sandbox it gets to play with.
Yeah. So I'm excited for that one. That looks very good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little, fatigued on Marvel, as y'all know, but the set of movies we have this year are that. We have the next Thor. We have, we'll see what the hell the new Black Panther is, because who the hell knows. I'm forgetting what the fourth one is, but I think we at least have those three, and those all sound very exciting to me. So,
is Guardians 3? When is Guardians 3 coming out?
Guardians 3 is next year. This year we are getting a Guardians Christmas special on Disney Plus, which is like the little prequel he made. Moon Knight is the next TV show. I mean, that looks crazy.
Yes, I'm glad, because that's another trailer that they showed, and I'm glad that it looks like they're going full Moon Knight of, like, the weird, like, multiple personalities. Just, like, here's Khonshu, the Egyptian god that is, like, possessed his mind. It's just, like, Moon Knight is one of those kind of C-tier Marvel heroes I've always had a lot of fondness for, because I read a bunch of his comics back in the day, and I'm glad that it looks like they're just, like, fully committing to the premise, because Moon Knight is a pretty absurd character, and the only way to, I think, make him interesting is to fully commit to the more ridiculous elements of the character, because if you don't, you end up with, it's just kind of like store brand Batman. It's just, it's just a rich dude who dresses up and goes around and beats people up at night, who doesn't really have superpowers and uses his money to buy things, and with, like, fancy planes and shit like that. But if it's like, oh, he's that, but also he's possessed by the moon god, and also because the moon god has, like, the presence of the moon god in his mind has driven him insane and fractured his conscience into multiple personalities that he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he never knows who he is. Like, that's a way more interesting character. I'm glad it looks like they're going fully in that direction.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, a couple of other... So next I have a set of video game movie news pieces, which is that... So the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 movie is coming out in April, but they did announce this last week that they've greenlit a Sonic 3 and a Knuckles spin-off series with Idris Elba that's going to be on Paramount Plus. And I basically put this on the outline because that means we technically got an announcement for Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
Yes. No, it's I was disappointed I felt like a lot of video game websites really fucked up by not doing more jokes about that in headlines. I would have had an absolute field day where I headline writer and had this news in front of me. But yes, we're getting Sonic 3 and we're getting Knuckles, and hopefully that does mean that you'll be able to, put the, like, Knuckles disc in somehow. Like, if you're, like, are streaming a version of, like, Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and you put the Knuckles movie disc in at the same time, they just put Knuckles in a couple of scenes, like, in the background of Sonic the Hedgehog 1.
They should, so this will be all on Paramount Plus. They should absolutely make that a streaming option of, like when the Knuckles TV show comes out, they should have new cuts of Sonic 1 and 2 that do stuff with Knuckles in them. Like, that would be great.
And if you try to, like, do it with almost any other movie, all it does is it just plays the ring, or the, like, the blue sphere minigame from Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which is what it did with, if you just put most other video games in it, that's just what happened. That's what they should do. They should just, like, play a video of that on your fucking screen. It's like, what the fuck did you expect? Very
funny. Sean, I would give anything to go back in time to Idris Elba when he was leaving The Wire in Season 3. And I'm saying, Idris, you have had an amazing run on this show, The Wire. You're going to go on to be a huge star after this. And he'll be like, really? That sounds great. That's what I'm hoping for. And I say, but, Mr. Elba, in the year 2022, you will sign on to do a series about Knuckles the Echidna for Paramount Plus. and he would probably go, I don't know what a single word in that sentence means.
Yeah. Like, the only thing he would know is, like, Paramount, the movie studio, is like, okay, but, like, Plus, is that, like, is it, like, a magazine? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so there you go. I'm, we'll see. I hope Sonic the Hedgehog 3 just gets really crazy and introduces all of Knuckles' Chaotix. Really, that's what the Knuckles show should be, is Knuckles' Chaotix, and it's him and his, like, weird group of friends solving crimes.
Yes. And they're, like, weirdly magnetically tied to each other through some ring, because that's what that game was about. And it's, like, they're, like, stuck together, and it's just a slapstick comedy.
Speaking of video game movie stuff, Netflix announced that they have acquired the rights from 2K and Take-Two for a BioShock movie. No writer or director attached, because who needs that? Why would you need a pitch for the movie before you decide to make it? But they're making BioShock, maybe. So maybe in the year 2024 or 2025, BioShock, a full decade after the last game.
Yeah.
Yay?
Yeah, this is a good example of what we were just talking about. Of, like, it's just the corporation buys the IP to make the content through the IP without, like, any other considerations. It's like, oh, a person will recognize the name of BioShock, therefore I will spend a lot of money for this IP. Do I need to worry about, is there someone that I know that wants to do this? Is there a director that's interested in the material? Is there a writer that's interested in the material? Are there actors? Is there anybody interested in this? I don't know, but I will spend a lot of money to just own the ability to do this. It's the classic video game movie thing of that they only ever get around to it, like, 10 years after it would have been timely. Because there was going to be, like, there was, like, a whole Gore Verbinski fucking produced whatever BioShock, development hell thing that happened, like, I mean, when that game came out. That was, like...
he was coming off Pirates of the Caribbean 3, so this was, like, 08, 09, like, very long ago.
And then that, like, very quickly just sort of went dark. So the idea of now there being another BioShock movie, which I don't even know... Like, what does that even mean? Like, the if you're trying to adapt the plot of BioShock 1, I don't know what the fuck that means. Like, how do you make that a movie? Like, the whole point of the thing is that you're playing as the game character who's getting orders from Atlas or whatever, and that, like, it's a sort of, like, satire almost of like, video games and objective-based, like, thinking and things like that, pairing off of the objectivism of, like, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead and stuff like that Rapture is playing off of. Like, what do you do? Like, how does that translate into a movie script?
It doesn't. It'll be a generic horror action movie that is called BioShock. Just as Uncharted is a generic Tom Holland vehicle with no real relation to the game series Uncharted, but it made $50 million this weekend, so we will get much more of that, and Tom Holland will never be in a real movie, which is sad for Tom Holland, but, he made his bed.
The BioShock movie should be like, how there was that, like, 10-minute sequence in the Doom movie with The Rock that was just all first person. That's, like, the only thing that anybody remembers or knows about that movie. I haven't even seen that movie, and I know that from that movie. They should just do that for this, only that's just the whole movie. It's just entirely, it's like that Hardcore Henry or whatever. Just, like, make the whole thing first person, and that's, like, the only way you can at least make me sort of say, at least you went for it with a BioShock movie.
Who knows? It'll be bad. It's Netflix and it's a BioShock movie. Man,
it either will be bad or it will never be made, right? Like,
yes,
those are the two options. It'll be a thing where they spend a lot of money to get the rights to make it, and then because they don't have anybody to make it yet, it's going to end up in some sort of, like, weird development hell, is, I think, again, a very strong possibility with anything like this.
All right. You want to do some video game news? Nintendo has finally pulled the trigger. They kind of backed off this a year or two ago, but they are finally pulling the trigger on closing the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops for good in 2023. Now, 2023 in March will be the final shutoff, but it actually is all happening much sooner than that, because on May 23rd of this year, 2022, it will no longer be possible to use credit cards to add funds. And then in August of this year, you won't be able to add funds in any form or fashion, including through eShop cards. So basically, May is the last call for buying anything on the eShop, and that's only a couple months away, which feels shitty to me. That feels like I don't know why they needed to do that soon, but okay. But then it will be completely shut down in 2023. They say there will still be a mechanism to re-download your games after that. We'll see what that is. But it's a bummer. We've talked about it before. Everyone's been talking about it this week. There is a whole lot of stuff on the 3DS and Wii U that is just not available anywhere else. The 3DS has a lot of virtual console stuff, like all of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and NES and Super NES, and the Wii U has a lot of that, plus GBA and DS and old Wii games and all of this stuff that is just not going to be available anymore, plus all of like the indie titles and fun stuff like that. Let alone just the major games that if you don't have a cartridge for are definitely in danger now. Luckily the 3DS is very easy to jailbreak now. I will probably be doing that in the months ahead, and pirate the shit out of stuff, because if they're not letting you buy it, you are smooth sailing. Pirate whatever the fuck you want. I don't give a shit. So it's a weird situation.
Which that leads me, Jonathan, to say that I did buy for about $100 a new Nintendo 2DS XL, a refurbished one after this news came out, and I have jailbroken the shit out of it. So I got it. I got it yesterday. Spent a lot of yesterday jailbreaking it. One of the main reasons because I had been thinking about getting a 3DS fucking forever, and one of the main things holding me back was that it's, from what I understand, it's like a very painful process to do like region shit on it without just full jailbreaking it. And a lot of the games I was interested in were specifically like Japanese games and stuff like that. And then once this news came out, there was because there had always been a part in my head of I don't know if I want to go so far as to totally jailbreak the device and stuff like that. I had a little bit of some sort of qualm. And then this happened. I'm like, oh, fuck you, Nintendo. And the qualm went away. And I was like, yes. I'll just, and then it was so immediately, as soon as I saw the news, I was like, I wonder how expensive they are. If I could get one super cheap. And yeah, I got a one, and I'm very happy with it because it's the purple, Game Boy Color purple version is the,
that's
the
cool.
color, and that's the same model of Game Boy Color I had. So I thought that was cool, and it was only about $100. And then I bought a 32 gigabyte micro SD card, and I have to say, it is hilarious how draconian Nintendo's online and all of that shit is. To now having jailbroken it, how incredibly easy that was. For how useless all their weird draconian online bullshit is, and it's the hardest part about the whole process was me just trying to figure out how to navigate some of the OS, because it is very old, and it's very Nintendo. It took me a while to be it's been a while since I touched a Nintendo device, and kind of navigating around that OS and stuff like that. But yes, I haven't had time to really mess with anything. All I've done is, I got it yesterday. I broke it open, downloaded some homebrew stuff, and then I downloaded Pokemon Crystal, just to get something very, very quick to download and just to prove that it could work. And then I also downloaded the Japanese version of Persona Q to see if I could get a region a non-US region thing to run, and all that stuff runs great. So
that's wonderful. Yep. And, I love the 3DS, and so you are in for, there is a million fun things to play on it. I've said for a long time, I still am kind of in the mind that the long DS to 3DS lineage is my favorite overall Nintendo thing, because I just love so much that is on these systems. I love the form factor of the DS. I love the two-screen thing. There's so much stuff I love about it. I've got mine here. I love these systems, and I think that is the right thing to have done, Sean. I actually was, when I saw that they were on sale refurbished for $99, I almost texted you, and I'm like, I don't know if he actually cares. But
I saw that you had retweeted it, and it made me funny, because I had already bought one by that point.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
that's awesome. No, but there's a bunch that...
One of the reasons why also, and this is one of the things that it fucking sucks shit that they are shutting this down, is that one of the reasons why I wanted to actually own one is that DS and 3DS games are one of the few things that, even if the emulator can, if you want to emulate it on PC, which is the other way you fight this kind of thing, right? So for when the stuff the virtual console games go away, and now the entire the history virtual console will be gone now, because every console that supported virtual console will no longer have online access to the store. That stuff, that's fine, because it's if I want to play Super Metroid, I can just play Super Metroid on my PC through an emulator, and I have no problem with that. But DS and 3DS games, because of the way they're set up with the dual screen, even if you get something that emulates well, and as far as I know, 3DS stuff, the last time I looked at it, still a lot of titles didn't emulate particularly well, just on a technical level. But even if it emulates well, it's still super awkward to do anything that uses the dual screen format, like even just like mildly actively. And so it's that kind of thing where you really want to have the actual hardware to play those games, because it's such a unique hardware format. And that's one of the things that is particularly, I think, frustrating about them shutting this down, particularly what is like just about 10 years, a little bit over 10 years, I guess, from when the console came out, is that they're never going to make something else that's like this, right? There's never going to be a thing that's like another great way to play games with the dual screen format if there's never another console that has the dual screen format. And I don't imagine that they're ever going to do that again. And so it really, really fucking sucks that they're shutting this down. But it does mean that now would be the time, if there are people like me who have always been interested but never quite taken the plunge. This is like a good excuse, and probably you want to try to get it sooner rather than later, because there might be enough of like a pressure put on like demand for this because of their shutting down the market that some of the used ones might start going a little bit up in value, which is one of the reasons why I jumped on it as soon as possible. And then if you are interested in jailbreaking it, it is incredibly easy. All you just have to do is like Google hack 3DS and follow instructions. And if you have any like level of technical competency with computers and file management, it is like the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, no, it seems like it. My only, like, for me, it might be slightly more complicated because I actually have used this thing before, so I've got stuff on it, but I can figure that out. And, you know, who knows, I might even wind up buying a second one just for jailbreaking and, like, having on the side and stuff. Because I've had other region games I've wanted to play. Like, I've always wanted to either import or download or something the Japanese version of Dragon Quest XI that was on 3DS, because it's a totally different version of the game, and I'd love to see how that plays. And you're so right about you need the actual hardware, because, like, I know one of the games you want to play is Persona Q, and Persona Q is great, and Persona Q is all built around the Etrian Odyssey system, and the Etrian Odyssey games cannot exist on any other platform. They are DS games to their fucking core, because they are about drawing maps and using both screens, and it's super cool. You wouldn't want to play them anywhere else, even if you could, because that's what they're all built around. It's like having a little notebook in your hand, and the stylus and everything. It's really cool. And there's plenty of experiences like that, you know? So, but the 3DS, Sean, has a million great games that you could play. I'd recommend both the Persona Qs. Maybe you can try to get into one of the modern Fire Emblems again, even. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff on there.
That's why I've been looking at that. And then, like, honestly, like, one of the other things I had, like, wanted it for, and, like, I think, like, it will be good for, is just playing Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons why I downloaded, because, like, when I got it, I just had because I have all my old physical Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color games and stuff. But, like, a lot of those, like the old Pokemons and stuff like that, for most of them, the saves don't work because the batteries
are
old
dead, yeah.
And stuff like that. So I got a lot of that out, and was like, because it had been bugging me for a while that some of that stuff didn't work anymore, and I wanted to find a good way to play it. And those are also good examples of games that, like, you can emulate Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games on PC, but it always is weird because it's just like the screen's not meant to fill a whole like laptop screen or whatever, you know, or like God help you if you're putting it on a TV. It looks like complete shit. It's like they're really, those games in particular kind of have to be played handheld or it's just really awkward. And so that's the other thing, is that this is just like a good, you know, I mean, because it can play those games natively. I mean, that's one of those things about this, is that them shutting down the Wii U and the 3DS eShops is like, it's a real end of an era, because it's the end of both the like lineage of GameCube to Wii U, and the lineage of Game Boy Color, or Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Nintendo 3DS. Like, both of those lines, particularly the handheld Game Boy stuff, going back so far, where there has been not always totally comprehensive, but a pretty significant, at the very minimum, level of backwards compatibility that has like persisted through all that stuff, in this like very clear, direct lineage that now, you know, like the Switch is really awesome in its ability to sort of fuse those two things, but it also means that if you're shutting down that old eShop, that like creates this wall that all that stuff now, you know, if like someone a year from now hears about Persona, like it plays Persona 5 and is like, oh, this is so cool, and they look up and see that, oh, there's Persona Q2 has the Persona 5 cast in it, that person will not be able to play that game unless they jailbreak a 3DS and pirate it, because it will be the only way to access it, and stuff like that. And thinking about that is a real bummer.
It is. Or the fucking hell market of trying to find old carts, which are going to be going up in price now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sucks. And, you know, if this were coming in a different context where the Nintendo Switch had all those virtual console games, it'd be very different, but it doesn't. And the Switch Online stuff is just not a replacement for it. The NES and Super NES libraries are pretty good in a lot of ways, but they're a subscription thing. It's you know, it's a little different on that line. And then on other systems, I mean, the N64 side of it fucking sucks. You have to pay so much money for it. The Genesis side of it makes absolutely no sense. And so it's just a lot of stuff that you're missing. And they've never tried to emulate, you know, DS games or GBA games or that kind of stuff on the Switch. And it makes no sense. And when Nintendo released this news, they did this little fact of like, one of the fact questions was like, what will you do about old games? And it was basically like, fuck you, we don't care. And like part of it was like, we have the Switch Online service. And it's like, the Switch Online service has been going for 4 fucking years and has 3 Nintendo systems on it. And one of them has like 5 games. It's so bizarre to me. And I think nothing's ever going to happen with any of this legislatively, because we live in a hell country where Congress can't do anything. But like, digital store management needs to have some kinds of laws around it. At the very least, I do think there needs to be a conversation, and there's some lawsuits that are moving against this, I know, on Apple and Google, of the whole language of buying stuff digitally just needs to be changed, because if you buy it digitally, but then in a couple of years they can turn off the store and stop you from doing that, like, it's not purchasing, and I think people need to remember that, because I will say, I definitely looked at my physical media collection after this and like breathed a sigh of relief. Like, I'm really glad I own all those 3DS games on cart. I'm glad I still buy my PlayStation games on disc, because they're going to do the same thing one day. You know, it's an extra layer of protection.
Yeah, I actually want to read, Jonathan, that the thing you're referencing with the fact, because I saved the image because when this announcement happened, they released a fact, and then there was a section of the fact that is particularly egregious, and then in I think an hour or two they removed it because everyone jumped on it immediately because it's like really awful. So you can't find this on their site anymore, but I saved the image because I thought it's like, this is just unbelievable the way this is written. So this is from their original version of the fact with this announcement. Basically question. Once it is no longer possible to purchase software in Nintendo eShop on Wii U and the Nintendo 3DS family of systems, many classic games for past platforms will cease to be available for purchase anywhere. Will you make classic games available to own some other way? If not, then why? Doesn't Nintendo have an obligation to preserve its classic games by continually making them available for purchase? Answer in 3 bullet points. 1. Across our Nintendo Switch Online membership plans, over 130 classic games are currently available in growing libraries for various legacy systems. The games are often enhanced with new features such as online play. 2. We think this is an effective way to make classic content easily available to a broad range of players. Within these libraries, new and longtime players can not only find games they remember or have heard about, but other fun games they might not have thought to seek out otherwise. 3. We currently have no plans to offer classic content in other ways.
Oh my god, it is so weird. I think there was a time when Nintendo was not perfect on this, but were much closer to being industry leaders with all the virtual console stuff. And now, I mean, Xbox is very clearly in first place with I mean, no one else is up on that league of trying to do this. PlayStation is in a pretty shitty place, but it sounds like they're going to... But at least the PS5 is back compatible with PS4. And it sounds like they're going to be adding some stuff via subscription service soon for PS1, 2, and 3. So we'll see. But then Nintendo just actively shutting all of it off is somehow even worse. It's so weird to me.
Yeah. And it's just like with this fact, it's like, it's such a fuck you, because they don't answer any of the, like, they make these very reasonable questions. Will you make these games available in another way? If not, then why? They never answer that point. And then, does Nintendo have an obligation to preserve its classic games by making them continually available for purchase? They never address that either. I really makes me wonder if there was just an intern working at Nintendo of America that knew that this fucking sucks shit, and they intentionally worded these questions as to, like, make it very clear how fucked up it is. And then just putting like their corporate, like, here's the thing you have to put on like your answers. Because it's like the answers are just this like super corporate worded, like, we think that our current classic game service is fantastic. And that's it. It's just,
so bad.
Really
it's so bad. It's very bad. Anyway, pirate shit. Piracy is the only way game preservation really happens, and it is really important, and it is, it's a very valuable part of the video game space that I do not think you have to feel bad about engaging with for older stuff. If you are like pirating new Nintendo Switch games, fuck you, don't do that. But yeah, like anything that they're shutting down, go hog wild with it, because frankly, if you don't, and not enough people do, then this stuff doesn't get preserved.
Yeah, because that really was, that was like how it felt to me. Of like I had, when thinking about for years, like wanting to get a 3DS and potentially jailbreaking it, mostly to like, because one of the main things was I wanted to just play all the Dragon Quest games, and then like all the Dragon Quest games, like some of them are available in English, but all of them basically are available in Japanese through the 3DS.
On the 3DS, yeah.
From a DS version or a 3DS version. And so it's like, and I like playing the Dragon Quest games in Japanese, because the idea of playing a Dragon Quest game and having your heal spell not called Hoini just feels like, heresy. I don't know what the fuck you people are doing. And so, I wanted to play it in Japanese. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to get it. But I always had, like, the angel devil on my shoulder. The devil just being like, yeah, just do it. And the angel being like, no, like, you still have lots of, like, even if it is a bit egregious, like, having to do it around region stuff and importing things from Japan, there are, like, direct legal ways that you could go about this. And then as soon as this announcement went up, like, the devil's like, do it. And the angel's like, yeah, you know what? Fuck it. Just go do it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm just going to go fucking do it.
I love it. All right, final piece of news this week, and this will transition us into our next topic. But MiHoYo, the creators of Genshin Impact, have rebranded internationally to HoYoverse, and I thought this was interesting because I hadn't heard about it until I literally saw it in the game. Mm-hmm. And Sean, I was wondering, you being the Genshin Impact super fanatic otaku boy,
yes,
could you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so basically what's happened is MiHoYo has done some, like, corporate, some I think smart corporate politicking to reorganize certain things in order to get around certain more restrictive laws in China. So because while like one part of it, and the part of it that's like very visible, is that they have rebranded internationally as HoYoverse, and that is like the logo that comes up. I think the actual more meaningful thing they've done is that technically Genshin Impact is no longer published by MiHoYo, because technically it is now published by a company called Cognosphere, which is a subsidiary of MiHoYo that is situated in, I think, Singapore instead of in China. So they've kind of moved some subsidiaries around, and if you're playing Genshin Impact, this is as far as I understand, this will not affect anything about what like the people making the game or anything like that. This is entirely, they're moving things around internally in the company to sort of like get around some like Chinese restrictive laws. So now if you pay attention, any trailers or things like that will now have this like Cognosphere like copyright thing in it, because Cognosphere is now technically the company publishing Genshin Impact and presumably all further MiHoYo games. And then HoYoverse is like they're sort of like, I think it's like basically not the name of the developer, more or less. But MiHoYo is still the like parent company, and none of that at that level has changed. But with the HoYoverse sort of like brand, one of the other things they're going for is it looks like they want to expand more into like multimedia territory. They've done some like one-off, like kind of animated OVA type videos, I know, for Honkai Impact the Third, which was their like really big game before Genshin Impact, and it's still big. Like it's that game is still supported on mobile. But they've done like a couple of one-offs with that kind of stuff, but it sounds like they're interested in expanding their like kind of multimedia presence, and I think that's where the verse thing is like wanting to do anime type stuff, and there's like a very clear space for a Genshin Impact anime is like the most obvious thing in the world to do. There are lots of other gacha games like Grand Blue that have had multiple seasons of anime adaptations and stuff like that. And I suspect that is like, not just suspect, I mean, it's more or less, without naming specific projects, it's basically what they said in the press release when they rebranded with the HoYoverse stuff.
Well, that was going to be my question, Sean, is like, when do we get the Genshin Impact anime? Because I want a Genshin Impact anime.
Yeah.
There are so many fun things you could do with it. Like, I can see it going one of two ways. You could do, like, a season every year or two that is, like, the big stories from the main, like, quest of the game. Or do it sort of like the Persona 4 Golden anime, where it's sort of a little anthology with the characters, and it's just fun stories every week. And that would be amazing. There's so many fun things you could do with it. I would kill for a Genshin Impact anime.
Yeah, what I really want is I want them to do basically the Genshin Impact of an anime called Carnival Phantasm that is in the sort of Fate franchise. It's not just like Fate Stay Night. It's like a couple of other things of like other projects made by that company. But it's this Carnival Phantasm was this OVA series where it's a comedy thing, and they just like pulled random characters from like all their different stuff, and most of it was like characters from the Fate universe, and just did like weird comedy skits and stuff with them, and just sort of like having all your action figures and just doing like like, oh, they're all doing like, it's all the characters from Fate Stay Night, but they're doing like the like Scooby-Doo wacky race thing or whatever, where they paired up in teams and they're racing around a track, and they've got like weird goofy like oil slicks and stuff like that, and just dumb puns and all that kind of really goofy shit. And I really want that, but with Genshin Impact, and just get me like a 10-minute skit that's just about Clay going around and like fucking everything up in Mondstadt and like blowing up like a store and just getting into crazy hijinks. Which I would not be surprised if they end up going a route like that, because like MiHoYo clearly really likes Fate and like UFO Table and a lot of stuff there, because they make reference to it. They cast a lot of actors, clearly, I think very intentionally, that also are very prominent in that side of things. And so I would love, like, I would both love the like, here's a more straightforward like real adaptation of the story, especially because that would then give the actors who play the main characters something more to be able to do than just like sighs and grunts and stuff like that, because they're all also very good. But then it would also, but that would be fun. But I also really want like just a ridiculous, totally non-canonical, completely silly, wacky, like comedy-oriented series. That would make me very happy.
Yeah, I mean, do it all. Genshin is extraordinarily popular,
Yes.
So I think it's a cool move, and hopefully open some stuff up. And that makes more sense hearing your explanation that this is also a corporate restructuring to get around weird Chinese laws, which are restrictive and getting more restrictive all the time. So
yeah, and I think it's like a precautionary measure in case there are more like restrictive laws that like kind of gets them out of that umbrella to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, we know just in movies, for instance, right now, China is very clearly trying to wean the populace off of foreign film. Mm-hmm. Like, if people don't know, Spider-Man No Way Home isn't getting a release in China. Still hasn't gotten one. It's made $1.6 billion without it, so good for that movie. But, like, Marvel movies used to make a lot of their money in China and aren't coming out there anymore, and that's true for a lot of stuff. And I wonder if there's any fear of, like, it going the other way and stopping exports as well. So, it's probably a good move to get to Singapore while you can.
Yeah.
Anyway, Sean, do you want to talk about what update are we on right now? Is this 2.6?
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah.
So 2.5 is the update that came out this week that added the Yae Miko banner, the stories for Yae Miko, and a new one for Raiden Shogun, and then this whole new event in Ankonomiya. And it's been some of my favorite stuff in the whole game. Oh my god, It's really good.
It's fucking crazy. Particularly the Raiden Shogun story is like, because the Raiden Shogun story is really like, I feel like stealth Inazuma Chapter 3, more or less.
Yes,
like it is very much kind of like they just did that kind of like interval chapter or whatever in Liyue, and like that kind of felt like an epilogue of a lot of the Liyue story stuff. This feels like it's a little bit like that, but for Inazuma, and really kind of in a cool way, resolving a lot of like stuff hanging over with the Raiden Shogun character in A and her sister and all of that, and kind of it feels like it puts in narratively Inazuma into a like context that will allow it to be a little bit more open in with like events and stuff like that, by removing the Sakoku decree and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was the first thing I played when the update came in, because the Enkonomiya stuff wasn't added for like 2 days.
Yeah.
So it started and it was just the stories, and I did the Raiden Shogun story, and I was blown away by it, because all the character stories are very good. They tend to be very high quality and very fun, but like the Raiden Shogun stuff One, it is just basically a fucking vehicle for Miyuki Sawashiro to show off, because it is like she is doing 3 voices in it,
Yes.
and a lot of it is just her talking to herself, and it's amazing. But then also, the writing is some of the most beautiful writing in the whole game. It's very touching, and the production values on it are out of this world. It's got like 2 or 3 big, CG cutscenes of the kind that I feel like in year 1 of Genshin Impact, we only ever got 1 or 2. And it's all in this one little story, and just ends with this incredibly epic battle, and then it creates a new boss for you to fight. It is, I said this online, if they had sold that as like a standalone $40 game, I would not necessarily have blinked at it, because it is just that good.
Yeah, it's really amazing, because in particular, it is that thing of where it's hard to imagine playing it without having Miyuki Sawashiro be Raiden Shogun, right? Like, I'm sure that the other voice actors also do a good job. Like the dubs seem good in Chinese, English, and Korean. But there is something about, like, that character just feels like it was... I mean, that doesn't just feel like it was basically created for Miyuki Sawashiro, because I know that, like, she also plays a character in Honkai Impact the Third that is, like, designed somewhat similarly to Raiden Shogun, and so her character in Genshin is, like, almost a little bit of, like, a reference or, like, a takeoff of her character in the Honkai game. So, like, clearly, and that game, I believe, only had Japanese voice acting for a long time. I think it now has more voice acting in it. So it's like, clearly this character is kind of made intentionally thinking about Miyuki Sawashiro. It's particularly when you go into that sort of, like, cognitive space or whatever, where A gets to talk to the puppet Raiden Shogun, and you get to hear, like, the 2 performances of those 2 characters back to back talking to each other is, like, some of the most impressive one actor doing 2 roles at the same time acting I've ever heard, because the voices are so similar. It's not like, it's not like Masako Nozawa playing Goku and Gohan and Goten, where it's like, particularly the age differences for those characters make those voices to be pretty distinct. It's not to, anything bad with Masako Nozawa. They're supposed to be very distinct. But Raiden Shogun and A are almost identical. They're supposed to sound almost identical. The only thing that's different about them is their personality, and the way with which she is able to just, like, very subtly do some things with her voice to very easily, clearly distinguish those characters even when they're talking to each other is some really masterclass stuff.
Total masterclass stuff. And then you also get her voicing Makoto, the other sister, for stuff near the end. But even before you get to all of that, Sean, the first half of this story is just, it starts with this, sort of MacGuffin-y plot of, like, there's, some stuff coming out of the ley lines in the trees. I don't remember all the lingo.
Yeah,
but
there are rift hounds that are attacking the roots of the Sakura tree, because, like, the taint, and all of that is, like, tied to the big Sakura tree quest that they added when they added Inazuma. Like, the tree exists there to sort of purify, sort of, like, evil shit, taint, whatever, like, word they use for it in the land, and that is starting to seep out of the roots of the trees because the rift hounds are attacking it.
Right. So you're going around, but, like, really what it is it's an excuse to go, like, in each of these places, there are soldiers from out of the past, which is the 500 years ago where that's the moment where Makoto died, and Raiden Shogun, where A took over and all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's back to that moment, and so there's these soldiers and other people from the past, like this old man she used to have tea with, and you have all these scenes between A and these characters, and you see how they look up to her, you see how she looks at them, and Sawashiro has, like, a series of basically monologues that are just stunningly performed. It was one I had to listen to with headphones just to hear every little nuance of the performance, because there's so much, because she is not an actress who, like, goes really big in this kind of role, but she has so much range within a little tiny, like, volume sphere. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's a lot of nuance in her work, and you get that here of just, there's a lot of feeling put into it in a way that really fleshes that character out. And then, of course, all of the Sakura Tree stuff does lead to this confrontation with Makoto in the second half, which is phenomenal, and it's both big character stuff and big plot stuff for the world. But man, it's an incredible character showcase. showcase. It's an incredible showcase, I just think, for the quality of writing at MiHoYo, because there's a lot of just like one-off lines with like the guy serving tea and stuff like that are really beautiful, that really flesh out this culture in Inazuma. And there's a lot of just fun gameplay stuff. That final boss battle is incredible and has some of the best boss music in all of Genshin, which is fucking saying something. Man, it's a real, like, this is a random Tuesday update, guys. Here you go. One of the best things in the whole game, or that you will play all year, and that is the magic of Genshin, is they will drop masterpiece level stuff on you like this with some regularity. But this is easily one of the best things in the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly, it kind of like puts a cap on Inazuma. I mean, obviously they'll continue to do stuff in Inazuma, and I'm excited to get to being able to have like festivals and stuff like that with those characters, which this kind of feels like it is that, and the fact that like a huge number of characters from Inazuma now are in the game that obviously had to be introduced over like the past 6 months or so. Feels like Inazuma is basically in the space where it can start having more of like the silly, fun character stuff in some of the events. And I'm really looking forward to that. But this also like dramatically feels like it is a cap on what has been a really interesting narrative approach in Inazuma that we've talked about when we've talked about like the 2.0 update and stuff like that, which is instead of like Mondstadt and Liyue, where the main plot stuff is like very kind of direct. It's like it's a main plot, and then you've got a big open world that has other stuff in it, but the main plot stuff is the main plot stuff. Inazuma has always felt like the main plot stuff is just a spine, and like the real story is this big kind of fractured narrative across these different characters, right? Like, so that's one of the reasons why I think they had the Ayaka and Yoimiya stories are necessary before you do the second half of the Inazuma plot. Like, you can't move on unless you do those, because like their perspectives are so valuable. And then the perspectives of like, you've got all the different islands, and you've got like the Sangonomiya people over here, and then you've got these destroyed islands that now we know the full context of like, why are Seirei Island and Tsurumi Island like in the state they're in? Like, we now know that fog, which we never really found out where the weird fog that consumed Tsurumi Island came from, that was all part of this cataclysm 500 years ago, where things from Conria were invading the world and plunged Inazuma into darkness, and Tsurumi Island, being on the outskirts of the island, was like never really rescued, and those people fell into like darkness basically. But you get all these different narratives of these different people, like slightly different cultures, that are all loosely tied together because they're part of the same sort of island formations, and seeing all these events and understanding history from these different perspectives, and then bringing it all together into this Raiden Shogun story where, you know, A is the only character outside of like Yaimika who has long lived enough, and actually more so than Yaimika, because Yaimika is old, but not that old. A is the only character who's like seen the whole expanse of all of this and actually understands a lot of like what has happened in the history. And so her being able to kind of clarify that all of these different things that we've seen, like the Sakura tree, the destruction of Tsurumi Island and Seirei Island, the like Otobashi, the snake god, and all that shit, all of it is brought in Konomiya. Like, all that stuff is connected around the same things. And this, like, there's multiple different sort of tragedies that happen, all coming from the same cataclysm 500 years ago related to Conria. And there's something about that, as somebody who's like, you know, I'm like obsessed with the world and lore of Genshin Impact, and I play it so much, that this like both gets to serve as this incredible story for my favorite character in the game, in Raiden Shogun, but then also it gets to serve as this sort of like kind of closing chapter and summary and like kind of epilogue for this more fractured world-based narrative and character-based narrative they've told over the past like 6 months of updates.
I think you're absolutely right on all of that. You know, I have not caught up with every little piece of everything they've added, but I did just finish playing because this one came out while I was taking a little bit of a hiatus from the game. I played the Kokomi story that they added. And I love Kokomi. She's one of my main characters on the team. She might be the most underrated fucking character in the game. People who think Kokomi is bad are idiots.
She is 100% the most underrated character of the game. She is a mainstay on most of my teams at this point. If you know what you're doing with her, she is incredibly good.
She is so cool. But also, like, her story, it's totally what you were saying, Sean. It doesn't feel like just a fun side story. It feels very essential. Like, it's a lot about her character, but it's also about the state, again, of this fractured world, and that there are these, like, factions, and that Kokomi in this case is having to try to like, bring these factions together, but also like she is in charge of this island, not all of Inazuma, and all of that culture is so cool. So I still have to play the Ito story, and then I have not finished the Yaimiko story that they added. But all of it is just phenomenally good, and I do think that sense of like building an overall culture through this fractured storytelling is incredible. And then of course this A story, I think you're right that it does feel like a really beautiful culmination of all of it.
Yeah. And then on top of it, you just get to like spend so much more time with A specifically, which is I think like one of the things I've really wanted, because her story mission, her first one, is really good, but it's more of like, it's like a fun kind of date event with her, and you get to see more of her perspective, and you get like that one really juicy scene with the picture, and you kind of talking with her about like, what does eternity mean? Can you exist in multiple ways at the same time through like Raiden Shogun and like the impressions you leave on the world as like symbolized by the picture they take? Like there's some good stuff in that, but this feels like A goes through this like really dramatic character change. You get to see these different sides of her like confronting her past, her having to confront Raiden Shogun. I like that, the way she confronts Raiden Shogun is like very typically her, of like, she's very stubborn about, no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fight this like perfect clone of me in a like death battle for like 500 years in this weird like abstract time space, which is an incredible moment.
It's a pretty badass thing to do, to fight your shadow double for 500 years. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the moment when you like teleport back in there and she's like, "What the hell? Like, how are you here and look the exact same after hundreds of years?" It's just like you're like, "Oh shit!" Some Doctor Who shit's going on in this one. That's the first time you learn that there's some Doctor Who shit going on in Genshin Impact. But then I think my favorite thing you get to see is that scene with Makoto's spirit, basically, where you finally get to see this other side of A that is always there, of her being the younger of the two twins, right? So she has this like kind of younger sister quality to her, that like getting to see that side with Makoto, where she's like, you get to see that relationship, this very like fun kind of sisterly relationship where she like looks up to and admires her older sister so much, and her older sister kind of teases her. And it's the only time Miki Sarashiro ever gets to not speak in Keigo or polite language with in the game, is both Makoto doesn't and then A doesn't to Makoto. And it's like every other time A and Raiden, like particularly Raiden Shogun, are very controlled and direct and like kind of precise in how they speak. And it's like it's that little scene with Makoto is the only time that gets to like fall away, and you get to kind of like see who she is underneath all of that, and you have like seen impressions of it, and you've known there is this kind of slightly like more human side to her that's a little bit almost like sillier, and a little bit more kind of like open and kind of honest and human, but getting to just like see it full and direct through that little interaction is both like really cool and interesting, but it's also very heartbreaking because it's of course like her having to say goodbye to the most important person in her life.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. I fucking loved it, but it's only one small sliver of this update, Sean. I have not played the full Yaimiko story. Have you finished that part?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that good too?
It's very good, yeah. It's more like, that one's more of like a slice of lifey kind of like, it's in a way that I like. It's more just like a bit more comic. It's a bit more sort of fun of you going around with Yaimiko, and there's another novel that has come out that is challenging the supremacy of the Yai light novel publishing company. You have to work with her to deal with that situation. And
I do like that element of it so far that I've played, yeah.
Yeah, and it goes into some stuff that I like, because, Yaimiko's not human. She is a, like, nine-tailed fox creature, right? She's a yokai, basically. And it goes into a little bit of that kind of stuff in a way that's very fun. Because I'm always interested in those characters in Genshin Impact, because I feel like you don't get a huge amount to see things from their perspective. You get a bit of that in Liyue with like Ganyu and stuff, but Ganyu is also half, right? So she's half sage or whatever, and she's half human. Where it's like Yaimiko is just fully not a human character, and it feels like both Ayane Sakuda's performance and the writing is very conscious of the fact that she is not a human, and she's written in this very kind of fun, inscrutable, very kind of teasy, superior way of where she, I think, kind of like understands herself to be a little bit of a higher existence than most of the other people in Inazuma.
Yes. No, she's just such a fun character. I'm excited to play the rest of that. Have you unlocked her yet, by any chance, in the polls?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was very close to getting to the ceiling anyways, because I didn't get Sho or Zhao in the when he was up, I think at the same time as Shinha. So I didn't have him, but that meant I was very close to Pity. And actually, like, it was pretty cool because what I did, I was so close to Pity that I had all the wishes that I had saved up over the course of the Lantern Rite Festival, because I didn't pull for Zhongli or Ganyu because I got those characters earlier. So I had those saved up, and I spent all of them trying to pull for Yaimiko. Didn't get her, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm like so close to I was like, I think I'm within 10 wishes to getting that 90 to have it be the ceiling. So I spent all the like little coins I had to get like 3 or 4 wishes and pulled some single wishes that way. Didn't quite get her, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm like within 2 or 3. So I re-upped the like $5 30-day thing, which just, if you buy more than of that, it just continues to add 30 days to whatever you had. So I was like 10 days away from needing to buy it anyways. It's like, I'll just buy that now, get the 300, which gave me enough to get one more wish. And then with that one wish, I hit Pity and got her on like a single Hail Mary.
Like fucking Charlie in the Chocolate Factory over here.
Yes,
your golden ticket.
Again, it's not that I got extremely lucky. I mean, if you know, unless I miscounted and I was actually like 2 away from it, and it's like the most incredible thing ever. I'm like 99% sure I just like gamed it to get to the Pity as quickly as possible. And she is very fun. She's not a character I think that like people like. If you're interested in min-maxing, or you want a character that you know is going to be like really powerful in a lot of different party configurations, like a Zhongli or Kazuha, she's not like that, and she's not a main DPS. So if you're looking for a character like that, she's not what you're looking for. But she's a really good kind of sub DPS Electro character. She goes well on teams with like Raiden Shogun. And she's just very fun to play. Her main skill is that she places these little like totems or that like shoot lightning, and you can place 3 of them at a time. If you place them in close proximity, they like power each other up. So like kind of her main play style is to place those around, switch to another character, fight as that character for a while these like little like turret thingies shoot lightning from the sky, and then build up her elemental burst, which is really powerful and basically consumes all the totems you've placed down, and then shoots like this giant beam of lightning from the sky with what is easily the coolest animation of any elemental burst, where it's this like low angle shot looking up at her as she like smirks down at the camera, and you see her 9 foxtails come up behind her, and it's in like the character trailer as well, so if you want to see it, you can see it there. And like the whole screen becomes dark around her and her eyes glow, and it's just the most fucking cool just like, this lady is going to completely fuck your shit up thing that's in this game. And then giant bolts of lightning rain down from the sky. So I've had a lot of fun with her, and I've been using a party with her, Kazuha, Kujo, who I have maxed out, so she's really good at buffing Electro stuff, and Kokomi, and I've been using that party in Konomiya stuff.
Nice, that's pretty fun. I have not gotten her yet because I did get Zhongli in the last banner, because I had not had him yet. So I'm pretty far away from Pity, but we'll see. I'm pulling in the banner for Yaimiko, because if I get her, great. If I don't, I'm getting closer to Pity, so it's fine. So I've been pulling some, but I'm not like going crazy on it or anything. But I've been getting a lot of Primo Gems from the Enkanomiya stuff, so I've had a lot to throw in there. I will say, Zhongli has been a fucking blast to have on my team, because I have focused on getting him up, and then I've also been doing some extra stuff. I decided to get a new artifact set for Kokomi, and I've been leveling her talents up a lot. So I've kind of slotted in Zhongli on my existing team where I had Yoimiya, and it's been really fun. I've had Ayaka, Ice, I've had Zhongli, Geo, Kokomi Water, and Raiden Shogun for Electro, and that's a really fun team. There's a lot you can do with that. It's a little overkill to have both Zhongli and Kokomi, but it's like because one's a shield and one's a heal, but it makes you pretty fucking impervious.
Yeah.
And Kokomi goes really great with Raiden Shogun, because she can just send her electricity all over with water, and then that goes well with Ayaka. That team has been like, Sean, it's by far my biggest like damage dealing team, and like I have been fucking decimating some enemies. It has been so much fun. Like, I was getting some talent materials for Zhongli yesterday, so I was in the domain, and I the domain where you get guides to gold, and I was doing that. I did that like 12 times yesterday, and that fucking group of enemies I could do so fast with that team. It was hilarious, and I'm having a lot of fun doing all of that. Team composition is a fun part of this game.
Yeah, it's the thing that, like, it's the thing. One of the things I look forward to the most with updates is getting new characters, not just because I like the characters. And obviously, like, I was going to dedicate myself to getting Yae Miko no matter what after that fucking character trailer dropped, which is just that character trailer
good.
is ridiculous. It's like one part showing how cool she is, one part like a magazine photo shoot, almost like with the way she poses for the camera. It's so good. I posted a thing on Twitter with screenshots from it because it's just like, this is ridiculous how good this looks and how good the character is and how she's like, her personality, how much it goes through. But also, yeah, just like the personality of the character is fun, but just every single character adds something new to the game and like opens up new possibilities. And it's very impressive to me that every single character they've added so far in a year plus of this game is so different. And they're not like doubling up on the same concepts. Like, every once in a while, a character will have an ability that's somewhat similar to another character's. Like, Ayaka got the same kind of like weird magic sprint thing that Mona has. But in every other respect, Ayaka and Mona are completely different characters and play completely differently. And that's the thing.
And more people should have that magic sprint because it's my favorite. I use it all the time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to eventually. Yeah, other like elements getting that will be cool. But it's a thing where it's just their game design is so good, and every time a new character is added, they have avoided power creep of it's not a thing where, you know, because Yae Miko's in the game now, Fischl is useless or anything like that. And while Fischl plays very differently, she can fill a very similar role on teams. But also you can put Yae Miko and Fischl on a team together if you want to just like be stupidly into just doing a shit ton of electro damage and just buffing that as much as possible. Like, Raiden Shogun Fischl Yae Miko team is totally viable with like Zhongli or someone there to like, you know, give you a shield, or Kokomi to heal you up. And the way that game design just keeps on sort of blossoming more and more in this big web of different possibilities, and every new character adds different possibilities. And like, Kokomi was kind of the biggest example of that for me, where I think people so underestimated that character because on paper she's just a like slightly better version of Barbara, but in practice the things that she brings to a team with her like Hydra application, and if you build her sets up either with the new healing set, or I use Tenacity of the Millilith, which allows her skill to buff damage for other characters, like, she can operate as a like damage buff character also. And so she's such a versatile character. And I think it's been interesting seeing that has been, I think, a common trend with the characters they've added since the Inazuma update, is going for like broader versatility, like in more interesting varied roles, rather than just like, here's another lightning character that's better than the last lightning character. It's a much smarter way than I've seen in other gacha games of avoiding power creep and making the play space just like kind of grow exponentially in possibilities.
It is really cool. It's the gacha side of it is, it's not that I'm playing the game a ton because I'm excited to get a JPEG with some voice lines, right? It's because I want to play with the character, you know, and that is so much fun. Yeah, no, Kokomi, it's so funny to hear us talk about this because my brother and I, Thomas, he's a huge Genshin Impact fan, and we have spent a lot of hours talking about, not hours maybe, but a lot of time talking about how good Kokomi is, because that's like maybe his favorite character. He talks about her a lot, and she's very cool, and, you know, it's awesome. So, but I feel like any character in the game, if you told me was your favorite character, I'd be like, oh, sure, I can totally see that, you know? Because I could see anybody building a team around anyone.
Yeah, especially because with like weapons and particularly artifact sets, once you kind of know what you're doing and you've got a good like idea for a build, every single character is viable. Like, you know, there are characters like Beto who at launch, like, I remember a lot of people going like, Beto's like low tier character or whatever, and me using it like, I think she's pretty fucking good. And then now you know, like she's in a bunch of like super top tier teams of like, you know, when people trying to like compete to clear the abyss as fast as possible. Beto's on a bunch of teams that people use in that, and like any Tartaglia team basically needs Beto on it. And it's a lot of stuff like that of where I think a lot of people underestimated the like amount of variety in how much like with what is a relatively small number of abilities each character has, how much like depth there is to the gameplay on a character by character basis there actually is in Genshin Impact.
No, I think you're totally right. And like I was just going to say, yeah. So I've been looking at all the teams and thinking about it a little more because I've been trying to do more of the Spire stuff, and I'm still not. The Spire stuff can be very hard, and I would not say I'm great at it by any means. But I have had fun making some. Like Zhongli has just unlocked a lot of potential for me in various places, and so that's been fun to try to shake it up. Because I'm definitely a guy who likes to kind of roll with one team for a long time while I'm out in the world. And then the Spire is where it kind of forces you to start thinking about it in other ways, and I think that's fun. The only other thing I want to say about Kokomi is she has a special place in my heart because she's the only one. I forget if I've told this story on the podcast before, where I have her 5-star weapon with her, and that's the only character where I have that, and that is because it's the luckiest I've been in all of Genshin Impact. I just got a I put in like 5 wishes into that thing and got it. It was not a pity. I'd gotten the pity on something else. It was just pure luck that I got that thing.
Yeah,
so.
I've not done much of the weapon gotcha. I think I only have one 5-star weapon, and ironically, it's like one of the few characters I don't have because I have most characters in the game, and it's Zhao. I've got his spear, but I don't have him. But his spear is super
you got to
good.
get him.
Yeah, I have his spear on Raiden Shogun because it's really good and it buffs crit rate, which is nice. But yes, it's like the one 5-star weapon. I think I'll probably start doing weapon gotcha more in the future just because the game is getting to the point where they have enough old legacy characters to do reruns that luckily it means that there aren't new characters popping up all the time, which like means that I don't have to be so stressed about trying to save every single possible wish. Because I would like to get some more of the 5-star weapons. But, like, I clear the Spiral Abyss. Like, people don't need 5-star weapons. Like, it's just...
No, you don't at all.
Cool.
It's it's a fun thing to have, but, like, it is amazing how, you know, generous and open the game is with all sorts of other things. Like, you know, I got Raiden Shogun's, the spear they added for her, the 4-star one, through the fishing quest, which was a ton of fun, because I love the fishing. And then the catch is a really good spear, and you know, it's great. And it's not a high-pressure, high-cost thing to get.
Yeah, and they just added a new free-to-play catalyst weapon that you get in that Enkonomia thing that's very good. Like, that would definitely, like, I want to level that thing up and put it on my Yai Miko and change up her artifact set, because it, like, takes energy recharge a bit out of the equation with how much it buffs it. And that is the thing that's nice about the game, is that even if you don't do the weapon gotcha, you do get just enough, like, new free-to-play weapons by creating them, by just getting them in normal character gotcha pulls, and then also they just update it every once in a while with, here you do this event and you'll get like a new spear, or like the sword I have on Albedo, which is fucking amazing, and that was just a free one they gave in that one in like an event with that character. That stuff is very nice. Yeah.
Okay, but we haven't talked about the other part of this update, because the Enkonomia stuff is so good. It's funny, because when did they add Enkonomia into the game, by the way?
I think the last update, so it would have been like over 6 weeks ago. It would have been like 9 weeks ago or something like that. So it was before the like all the Lantern Rite Festival stuff in Shenhua. Right. So it would have been it would have been over 6 weeks ago, because it was in the Ito update.
Okay, because I came back on the Lantern Rite update where Shenhe was in the banner.
Yeah.
I didn't pull for her, but I was in that one. Okay. So I had been catching up on Enkonomia, and I finished the original quest chain that they had added right before the new update came out. So I had been mainlining Enkonomia, and it's one of my favorite areas in the game. Mm-hmm. For pure exploration, it might be my favorite, alongside the snow area. What's that called? The
Dragonspine?
Dragonspine, yeah. I think this and Dragonspine, I really like this trend of at the beginning of the year doing a new exploration-focused area, because this is my shit. I just love this is the Metroid player in me. This is the, like, Legend of Zelda Breath in the Wild guy in me. I just love, you open up a big area, and it's like, go explore and find chests, and just a ton of it rewards your curiosity and running around in the game, and I think Enkonomia is phenomenal at that. And it's a super, super fun area with all these cool mechanics. You've got your your box is what I think about it in my head.
Uh-huh.
Your box, and you run around with that, and that whole thing is fun. But then they added a new Enkanomiya thing with this second version of it that is like the 3 spy. What is it called?
I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the 3 towers version. This
Three Towers thing,
something. Yeah.
Right, and that is this whole new thing that adds this other different version of the mechanic. It's so crazy. I love the whole thing. The new version of Enkanomiya, I feel like, is even more fun than the first thing they put in, which was already really fun. And I played on Friday an unhealthy amount of Genshin Impact. I played like maybe 7 hours, like split up over the day, not in one sitting. I had work to do and stuff, but it was basically all my free. I didn't wind up like watching or doing anything else. It was just mainlining, because I basically did all 3 towers. I got all of the achievements up to like, you have to find like 100 chests to do all of that. I had completely upgraded the box. Everything I just did everything you could do in that new update, and I did it basically like in one day, because the exploration was so fun I couldn't stop myself, and I was like physically tired holding up the controller, but it is so fucking good.
Yeah, I did almost the exact same thing. It was funny because I had told myself, like, I was like, I'm gonna space this out, and I'm gonna do one, because it's the event is, while you can do the whole thing in one big go, it's clearly designed around 3 areas and building up to these 3 different towers. And I was like, oh, I'll just do 1 tower at a time and kind of like enjoy it over the course of this week. And then I was like, then I started playing it, and it was combined with how much fun it was to explore, and then I was also trying to like get my head around how to use this like Miko team I had made, and so that was just like, I did the same thing where over the course of that day I just played through that entire thing, and it's so fun, and I hope it's a thing that like this is like a testing the waters kind of thing, with this idea of taking a pre-existing area and sort of like remixing it and putting whole brand new puzzles and new mechanics in it, because it's a really cool idea, and it's something that I like almost wonder if like Enkanomiya was specifically designed for this idea, because it so perfectly fits the pre-existing structure of Enkanomiya, but recontextualizes it, because those 3 towers already existed, but they weren't as centralized in sort of like the story for the first Enkanomiya thing. Whereas here it's like it is totally about these 3 towers and like breaking the sections out that way. And it's a thing that it feels like they're kind of like thinking about it that way. But I would love if you took like a swath of, like the mountains in Liyue or Dragonspine Mountain, or like, different sections like Seidai Island or something that we've already explored, and then remixing it with whole new mechanics. And allowing you to see it in a totally different way, because even though Enkanomiya wasn't that old, and for you especially, you had like just played through it, I found myself looking at the landmass and like the geography of it completely differently, because the puzzles were situated differently. It didn't feel like I was like just playing an old area. It felt like a new area.
No, I totally, and like I think the way the box like totally changes your sort of strategy of moving around and how you do the exploration, because it has a sort of resource management thing layered on of your basic moving around solving puzzles. And so there's a little risk reward to it. There's a little bit of having to keep an eye on that. It also impacts your combat abilities. Zhongli, I had just gotten leveled all the way up, so this was also like one of my first times like really heavily like using him as one of my mains. So I was having a ton of fun with that. Man, it's just it's a blast. The story around it is also super cool. It's not the most like in-depth thing they've ever done, but it's very fun, and adds to like more of that overall like cultural, fractal kind of culture narrative that they've done with Inazuma, and I loved basically every second of it. Even I think the boss they added at the end is one of my favorite like little boss challenges, because you fight it and then it opens it up as a challenge for you, and I decided to go right into doing it at level 90 right away, and I beat it, but it was like a lot of fun to figure out all the steps to like maximize, because you have to keep your eye on both of it's 2 monsters who are connected, so if one of them dies before the other one, then it'll revive it, so you have to keep an eye on their HP and do it evenly, and it was very fun to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and I also appreciate that they didn't do what they've done in older events where you have to like really kind of farm the same boss fight multiple times to get like all the stuff for the event. This one, it's just like, no, you just like, it's based on the difficulty level. Because that's been something I found a little bit tedious in some events where I've enjoyed some of their like unique event only bosses. But I only want to do it a couple of times, and then I have to. That's where like co-op random matchmaking comes in. You just like hope you get a good team that just completely fucks it up, and you can just like kill it in like 30 seconds and just cycle it over and over again. But I like this format where it's more just like make the boss a little bit more challenging than those other ones have been, and give it a difficulty level. And if you beat it on the hardest difficulty, you get all the rewards you get for that boss fight.
Yeah, my only complaint, and I don't even want to use the word complaint because I feel very ungrateful for saying this, but I wish there was more. Because now that I've kind of done it all, I want to do more with it, and I have all this leftover currency because I've fully upgraded the box, but I have all this. I wish there was like a store or something that would give me just some little trinkets so I could like spend all of that stuff, because there's still more for me to find even, and it's really fun.
Yeah, like I suspect that they might add something that's like that, because they've done that before where you get to like, you can spend your extra currency, just like at least turn it into Mora or something like that, or like some upgrade materials.
Yeah. Because this is gonna stick around for like another month. It's gonna be there for a while.
Yeah, it's the same thing they did with the Summer Islands, where it's like a 40-day thing. So it's like basically there for the entirety of this whole 6-week update. Instead of being, usually it's only for a half of an update. 3 weeks is usually how long events last.
The Summer Isles from last year, I thought those were fine. They certainly added some good stuff like the boat. But I will say Enkanomiya as like our second version of that thing where it's a sectioned, like a cordoned off part of the map that's separate, I think is a huge like step up. It feels like the Summer Isles were very much a test for like how to do some of this, and then Enkanomiya is a beautiful payoff to all of those ideas.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think Enkanomiya's like design is more engaging from a gameplay perspective, and the summer one was fun, but like I think the summer one, the thing I liked about it most was just the vibes, like the soundtrack and sailing around and the story. Whereas here it's more about like this cool gameplay stuff. Although I will say that there was a moment at the end of this story where you get all the stuff with Sumi and find out all the stuff with like the Vishaps, and that she's this like familiar of Orobashi that then was like raised by the Vishaps. That when that whole story is told, as like, they should add Sumi as a fucking playable character. Like that's
they
like,
really should.
That's such a cool fucking backstory. I mean, obviously the character model is like, you know, a more kind of like mob character with like a little bit extra flourishes on it. So it's not like she has the whole thing, but they should just like redesign her into being more of a like full fleshed out character design and just put her in the fucking game, because that is one of the coolest fucking backstories of any character in the whole fucking game.
It's definitely worth it to get to the end, because that payoff is very good.
Yeah.
Also, you do get some more stuff with Kokomi, and is it just me, or are they doing a ton of flirting between Kokomi and the protagonist? Because I feel like they want to get it on, and I want them to, because I love both of them.
Yeah, that's one of like, usually I feel like most of the characters have some sort of like, almost always like a same-sex character that feels like there's a like romantic pairings going on. I mean, each region has their lesbian power couple at the top of the structure, right? You've got Jean and Lisa in Mondstadt, you've got Beidou and Ningguang in Liyue, and then you've got, and we get a lot of it in this update, right, in Shogun and Yaimiko at the top of Inazuma. So you have your lesbian power couples. But there's just a couple of characters where it does feel like it's more about the protagonist character and this other one. And it's like the protagonist in Barbara, I feel like they kind of set that up. The protagonist in Kokomi is one, and then the protagonist in Ayaka also. Like all those are like, I like that. I like that it's like, it's only a couple of characters where I feel like they intentionally build a little bit of like a romantic tension or something there for you to be able to ship if you want to with the protagonist, but it's not like every single character you run into falls in love head over heels with the protagonist, which is something you get in these games sometimes.
No, I think it's because it's not every time, I pick up on it more,
Yeah.
I feel like, and I have more fun with it. And of course, that can be same sex, depending on which protagonist you chose. Or it can be opposite sex. But it's so fun. Man, we could talk about Genshin Impact all fucking day. It would be worth it. We already have for a long time. It's one of the best games, and they've had... 2021 was great, and they've had a hell of a 2022 so far, and what the heck is next?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, you know, to be fair, as of right now, it has literally zero competition, but currently Genshin Impact 2022 is headed for a hat trick, as the best game of the year 3 years running for 2022. I can say that for sure.
I mean, Sean, if they keep this up, and this will depend on, there's some big ones coming out this year like Elden Ring.
Yes.
But I might have to join you on this. We're just gonna have the same game of the year every year from now on.
Yeah, we might have to just make it its own separate category where it just gets the like special game of the year award every single year, because it's like, how can other games even compete? It's fucking Genshin Impact.
You know what we do, Sean? We make it Genshin Impact presents the top 10 games of 2022, and now it is sponsoring the event.
Yeah, that might be the strategy you have to take, because I mean, so far we're only a couple months into the year, and between the fucking Lantern Rite festival and all that shit, which was amazing, and now this update with Raiden Shogun, I mean, eventually, presumably, fucking Sumeru, the next continent's going to come out this year sometime. So yeah, it's been a great year so far, and probably the best stuff of the year is, or inevitably the best stuff of the year is still ahead of us for Genshin Impact.
Yeah, and we didn't even, God, I know we talked about the opera. We didn't talk about everything else from that Lantern Rite Festival. The last cutscene of the Lantern Rite Festival this year, which is like a 5-minute epic.
Yeah.
One of the best things they've ever done. They put out a CD, like not CD, like EP, like digital single of it's the opera and then the 2 big instrumentals from that download. Fucking great. Right now I am waiting on, with bated breath, I want my Enkanomiya soundtrack, because that's got some of the best music in the whole game. I
suspect that they're going to, I bet the Enkanomiya stuff's going to come out soon, because there's like a whole second half of the Inazuma stuff that we still don't have on as an official release, because even like the Watatsumi Island music isn't in a soundtrack release yet, and that's some of my favorite. That was one of the fun things about this update, was going back to Watatsumi Island for the first time in a while and be like, oh right, the fucking music on this island is so good.
I've been getting a lot of it because I did the Kokomi story and then the Enkanomiya stuff. Yeah, I've been hearing all of it, and it never gets old. It's beautiful.
Yeah, music's amazing. Yeah, the Lantern Rite Festival has been, in terms of like those kinds of more like daily life, just having fun events, that's the best they've done. Like, and it takes that from the cooking festival that they had done last year, which also had a similar like amount of like narrative heft to it. But yeah, that 5-minute cutscene is just like, it's shocking how emotional I get. Like, just like watching this, like, it's just get to see all of my people be very happy. Like Ganyu and Shenhe get to be friends, and like there's like just like a 5-second little shot of Ganyu like Shenhe being a little bit away from some of the other characters, looking at the fireworks, and Ganyu getting up and walking over to stand next to her, and they look at each other, and it's just like, the storytelling in Genshin Impact is so good, and the characters are so good, that just that little moment is so evocative of these two characters. Ganyu, who is half Adepti, half human, and so she's always felt a little bit out of place and like a little bit alone in the world. And Shenhe, who is a human, but was abandoned by her human family and raised by an Adepti in the mountains. And these two, and they have kind of passed each other by in their lives, because Ganyu, for all of Shenhe's life, Ganyu has been in Liyue Harbor, and this is kind of their first real meeting. And the fact that these two characters get to kind of find each other, and it feels like there's like a real friendship that could blossom from that. And obviously we don't see any of that friendship. This is just a little like 5-10 seconds thing in this little movie, and hopefully this is a character relationship they explore in the future. But it speaks to how good their storytelling is and how thoughtful it is, that like that little tiny moment, that cutscene, like really kicked me right in the heart, because of how much I liked both those characters and how evocative that moment was for how good those characters, like what kind of friendship they could have and like really help each other, because they're both very lonely in their own ways. Yeah.
No, totally. It's Genshin Impact. I think as the world gets worse, I want to spend more time in this world, which is just beautiful and perfect, and everyone's happy and good.
Yes, I just want to go see cool fireworks with all my friends and have, act like he's better than everything else. But like the 2 Lantern Rite festivals, he's still not like actually at the city watching the fireworks, but he's gotten closer to it, where he was in the hills the first time. Now he's up on the rooftop by all of his friends at that like fun little like in the trees. Maybe next year he'll be like a little bit closer to Liyue, and actually like, stop being a loner and go hang out with your friends, because you want to, buddy.
All right. I think that sums it up. Should we go ahead and cut here and let the people listen to our final Weekly Suit Gundam, the Origin talk?
Yes. let's stop Genshin Impact for now. I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the future because it is an endless obsession. But let's go ahead and get into some Gundam. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wacky and wonderful world of Mobile Suit Gundam. Another week on our Origin train, watching through each episode of the Origin OVA based on the manga of the same name by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. And we are today talking about the final episode of the Mobile Suit the Gundam, the Origin OVAs, which is The Rise of the Red Comet, Episode 6, the finale of Origin and of the Loom arc. And this is a pretty fucking good one.
It's startlingly good. I had always remembered liking it, but I think in my memory, Episode 5, which we gushed about last week, maybe overshadowed it a little bit, and I'd forgotten how good this one is. And I will say, of the 6 episodes of Gundam the Origin, this one raised in my estimation more than any other going back and doing this series again. I think this episode, in some ways, has the hardest task in front of it because it's the same plot as this stretch of the manga largely, but the manga, it doesn't end here, obviously. It's just the end of the flashback, and then you go into the story. The end of Gundam the Origin is the end of Gundam 79. So how do you create a final chapter of the Origin OVA that is a satisfying wrap-up to this 6-episode project? And I think they make some very key creative choices in terms of what they emphasize, what moments they play with, what they do in terms of, I think, just kind of genre structure that makes this episode, one, just ludicrously entertaining, and two, pretty thematically hard-hitting. And I think it's a fantastic closing episode.
Yeah, I think there's some elements of it that I'm not totally in love with. I think there's like a couple of scenes in this section that I think are a little bit kind of weird, but most of them are actually kind of from the manga. And it's not really like this thing's fault. Like there's some of the stuff with like Char and Revel. I've always found that sequence kind of a little bit strange.
Oh, I fucking love that scene. That's one of my favorites in the whole thing.
We'll get into it, but overall, it's an interesting thing of as you say, trying to find a way to bring, as a prequel, it is bringing everything up to the doorstep of where Gundam begins, but also for this OVA project, it has to be sort of the end of the story that this is telling, and it's kind of almost like serves as a coda for the whole story that has been told so far, because it's not like, like Char doesn't have a big crazy character arc, Sayla doesn't have a big crazy character arc. It's a little bit like the previous episode in that it's more about the larger scope of what's going on in the war, but finding a way to sort of narrativize that and have the beginning proper of like the 1 year war as we understand it from the original Gundam, feeling like it is this kind of like epilogue of this origin story we have been following along for these episodes. I think that it's a pretty interesting approach to that story.
I love it. I think there's two key things for me that make this work so well. One is, I think, just the command of like genre and tone and production of this episode. You have the first 20 minutes of this thing are this sort of blistering naval war in space, and I think it's maybe the best space battle fleet Gundam has ever delivered on screen. It's like phenomenally well done. It gets both this is the first big space battle in the history of the Universal Century, but also it still has that kind of grounded quality where it's very clearly built on like naval warfare, and then the mobile suits come in and changes everything. It's very cool. And then the last hour of it is basically like a spy story. I joked that it's Tinker Tailor Soldier Gundam, and it does kind of feel like that at moments. That's one of the things I love about that Char scene. There's a lot of stuff with Kycilia. It's very like espionage and politics focused, and I think it's just so good. But I think the other side of the coin that really makes this episode work is that I think this one really zeroes in on this thematic idea that has been here through all 6 episodes, but I think gets underlined here more. And some of this is from the manga, some of this is how I think they've chosen to intercut some things, which is that this war continues and expands because humanity wants it to continue and expand, which leads to this blistering line from Mirai's dad late in the episode that is one of 2 sort of thesis statements that I think this episode has, where he says humanity hasn't seen how far they can take this yet. And this is an idea I think lesser Gundam series have played with, that like war happens because humans are just violent. And I think like that can be a little facile sometimes. But I feel like this one earns it because we've spent 6 hours or more watching this increasingly violent group of vipers and bloodthirsty maniacs, which very much includes Char, taking the levers of power and pushing them forward full throttle, and enough people like basically signing the death pact together that this thing is going to continue. And I think it resonates very strongly with the World War I, World War II point of reference the original Gundam storytellers would have had. And I think the way it builds the finale of the whole thing around Revel's speech, the Antarctic Treaty, and does it in a way where we cut to every single like major character from the OVA series so far, other than Rambaral and Hamon, who I think were wisely kind of left with their perfect final moment in episode 5, sort of implicating everyone and like bringing it all together, I think is surprisingly powerful to me, and I think does a really beautiful job with this. Again, I think a thematic idea that can be facile, but I think there's a legitimate argument in the way it's presented this story in this very historically minded lens.
Yeah, and I think the thing I enjoy about it is that I it's not just that it's that people want the war to happen and that's why it happens. I think there's a good sense of like there are a lot of different kind of ideologies at play and different people involved in it for different reasons, like Caecilia and a lot of like the Earth Federation people who do feel like they are there because they profit off of the war's continuance, and that is why they are motivated. Whereas you have people I think are more legitimately ideologically motivated, which would be Giran and Revel, who to see like what the actual stakes of the war are and the consequences of what could happen if either side wins, and like want to bring about an actual victory. And then my favorite is Degwin Zabi, who is like very naive on the side, thinking that there is actually a path towards peace at this point, when like they are so far beyond that being feasible that he is like rendered completely like neutered at this point in the story, which tracks so much with what we see in the rest of Gundam proper, within his like sort of very ceremonial role in what Zeon has now become.
Absolutely. I think this whole episode is about teeing up. Like, it's interesting because the big action climax of Gundam the Origin is the very beginning of this episode. Mm-hmm. And then there are no more action scenes after that. The Battle of Loom is the last bit of like big mobile suit action. And then from that point on, it is espionage, it is politics, but it is all building up to the precipice of the war you saw in Gundam 79. And I think that like notion of this episode being a dramatization of this tipping point moment where there were two roads to take and one was very clearly taken, and that is the path that everyone's going to have to walk in the original story. This is why Gundam the Origin is the best prequel I've ever seen. It is just so well balanced to, I think, lead you to the door of the story in such a compelling way on its own terms.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there are a million things we could start with this episode. Should we just begin with the battle itself, the Battle of Loom, which we got a little bit of Char's side of it in episode 5, but now we get they focus a little more on the Federation side in part 6. I would say mainly so that you can get all the crazy money shots of people being terrified of Zaku's as they rain hell down upon them.
Yeah, because this is kind of like the previous episode. This is overall a quite close adaptation of the volume of the manga that this is adapting, which is the second part of the Loom arc. Because the end, if you people remember, the end of episode 5, with Char's fantastic line about, kneel before me, God. That is a sequence added into the anime in order to give that episode like a really powerful ending. But where this starts with the fleet battle and Dozel's whole strategy of like hiding and bringing his fleet around in this single file line, and then the Zaku's flanking them, all that is stuff that happens at the beginning of the volume in the manga. And yeah, this is, I think, as you said at the top of the episode, Jonathan, is, and I would agree, the best naval battle. Like, it's like the most full-bodied naval battle we've ever seen in Gundam, because usually the naval battle stuff is stuff you get like little glimpses of. There are only a couple of series that really commit to it. Like Iron-Blooded Orphans is one of the few that really shows like a full naval conflict, but in that it's usually like, here's our characters who have like one or two ships and they're fighting like a larger group of ships, whereas this is, here's two full fleets going at each other, and one is using much more creative, very desperate tactics and has their like sort of ace in the hole, the Zaku, to win the day, and then the Federation are very like staid in like these very sort of like what feel very old school, very conventional. We're putting all our ships into this very standard formation. We're sitting back here. We don't want to like really risk anything. And like the military tactics, and this is like very echoes a lot of stuff from World War One and World War II, of where the much more like radical, aggressive military tactics completely demolish this like very, sort of like peacetime era like idea of what warfare looks like, where these are all the Earth Federation are all people who have been trained in academies completely abstract from any actual conflict. Most of them are just, they're admirals because that's what their family has been forever, and like that's very much the sense you get. And seeing these like two versions of war clash, and the much more aggressive, technologically advanced one win out over the much more sort of the larger force that is more populated and stuff. It's just, I think, a very satisfying dramatization of this kind of war that we have seen saw multiple times in the 20th century.
Yeah, it's basically a 20-minute sequence, because this episode has the shortest recap. It's only 4.5 minutes, so we get a nice short little recap, which means this is like easily the longest episode of the Origin. It's a full feature-length movie, basically. It's 80 minutes plus without the recap. And so the first 20 minutes after that recap are the battle. So it's a solid 20 minutes of action, and it is... One, it just looks like a scene where Sunrise basically opened a Scrooge McDuck vault and let the animators go in there, because it is lush as lush can be. It is beautifully animated. It makes phenomenal use of both CGI and hand-drawn techniques all together in this. It starts with that very sort of traditional fleet battle, and there's still such... I love that it's not just that, like, they ignore the fleet battle to focus on the mobile suit part of it. There's still, like, Dozle has this big strategy of he sacrifices some ships to the TNM fleet, which convinces them that Dozle is going to retreat. But what he actually does is he makes this circle maneuver back around to the Revel fleet, going in single file, and then he fans out, and you have that amazing first volley where they fan out and just start volleying all of the ships. And there's that great moment where you have him pass over, and Revel looks up and sees Dozle looking down at him. There's a lot of... General Revel might be my favorite character in this episode. He has so much good stuff. This is very much General Revel's episode. But I love that moment. So you have all of that kind of stuff going on, of like the fleet battle. And then I think the way they handle the mobile suit part of it, where it just slowly... Because it kind of does it from the Fed point of view, where it's slowly ratcheting up the tension of like... What's the play here by Zeon? And then, of course, the Red Comet comes in and starts blowing up ships left and right, and they can't figure out what's doing it, and then all of the Zaku's come in. And you have stuff like the Black Tri-Stars cutting the Revel's ship, the Ananke, in half with a heat axe because they fucking can, and it looks cool, but it's also terrifying. And there's shots of people in the ships looking up as a Zaku lands on them, and you get the red eye as God, the red eye of the Zaku is one of the best decisions that anyone's ever made in the design of anything. It's just a very intimidating, crazy, impressive battle scene that feels like it's out of this is worthy of a Lord of the Rings or something. It's just animated.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those of where in the manga it is it's a pretty involved battle sequence in the manga also, but this is where, as we've seen in other episodes, the animators really get to just kind of go to town, and they're just some very egregious, big, crazy sequences involving all our other characters. Char gets a bunch of really fucking crazy shit to do.
Yes.
I think my favorite part is when I think it's Mash from the Black Tri-Stars has the big, it's a giant double-handed Heat Hawk that has two boosters on the back of it, it's the gun hammer that the Turn A Gundam uses or some shit, and just I like the way it's animated. It's kind of like the axe is dragging his Zaku with the amount of thrust, and the Zaku's thrusters are on almost to keep it slightly in control. There's something
right.
of the sense of weight and momentum in the 3D animation is so well studied. It's that thing that Gundam it typically does incredibly well, which is understanding some of the ways in which zero gravity movement works, at least in a movie-esque fashion, certainly in terms of making it feel very kind of grounded and realistic in the physics. And so seeing the thrusters interplay as he's kind of almost spinning out of control with this giant crazy axe that has rocket engines on it, and barely getting it in control and basically cutting an entire ship in half. There's lots of really juicy, meaty sequences like that in this opening 20 minutes.
The big standout Char sequence here is where he notes to himself, I have 3 rounds left. That should be enough for 2 ships. And he blows up one with 2 rounds. He has 1 round left. He uses a heat axe to make this like strategic cut, and then he fires 1 more into the engine of the ship and blows it up. And we cut over to Kozin, the guy who is one of Rambaral's buddies, who sees it and is like, well, I'm useless. There's nothing I can do here with that guy on the field. And so he comes up to Char and says, hey, I have an extra clip remaining. Do you want it? And Char says, no, you should focus on your own glory. And then he has this amazing line where he says, work hard enough for the lieutenant who was unable to join us, and flies off, reminding you that Char, among many other things, is a petty bitch.
Yes, yeah. It's like Char's... Yeah, he both like gets to put in his little snide remark, and it's the way in which he's like, I could go take out probably some more ships. I don't even need this fucking rocket launcher. Is part of the implication there also. That is, yeah, fucking hilarious. This is just the happiest we have ever seen Char in his entire life. Like this is where we get the like, you know, when we talked in like during Zeta Gundam and stuff with his Quattro Vagina persona, of how much like this is the person that Char wants to be 100% of the time. This is what he loves doing. He loves being in his big fancy ridiculous red robot with its big fucking unicorn horn and flying around and doing crazy shit. And it's just, he loves living on the edge, being this kind of like, the Red Baron soldier ace type character. And this is just what he wants to be in life. And it's like it's something I think that captures so much about his character here is the sheer amount of joy he has in inflicting his like power and mastery over all these other people.
I mean, I think it's it's an unspoken thing that is in this episode, is that this is like the peak moment of Char's life.
Yeah.
Because right after this episode ends, he's about to be humiliated over and over and over again and lose his position in all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And go down a very different path. But at this moment, he is on the top of his own fucking world, and he could not be happier. You have all those amazing shots of him zipping through the sky as the red comet. You have the black tri-stars being the ones to sort of give him his name of like he looks like a red comet up there, yep. While they're all mad at him because... But goddamn it, he's so good. They can't hate him too much. It's amazing. But I think I like that it's not just Char. I like that you get MASH doing the thing with the fucking heat addicts. It's there's so much good stuff.
Yeah, and then also amidst the sequence you have a little stuff with Ryu, our
I wanted to talk about that. Yeah.
wayward pilot from original Gundam who is here at the battle. This is all stuff that's in the manga. As well, that he actually is the person to discover that that Dozo's fleet has actually flanked around to Revel's fleet, but can't get back in time. And there's a lot of good stuff of kind of seeing the beginning of the fight from his perspective, and then him trying to dock and not being able to, him being like flung out into space where he has this like realization that I think like I don't know if I really love the full way that the anime portrays it, because I think some of like the way it's performed, it's very different to how I kind of read the lines in my head when I was reading the manga. But of him floating amongst this debris, basically calling himself like, oh, I'm just going to be another piece of trash in the pile out here in space, and him floating like that for a while, and then like slowly crawling back the will to like live and try to fight and trying to get the dude with the glasses. But I like Ryu's role in this as just like kind of this POV from the Federation side, seeing how immediately out of control the battle goes, and how like overpowered the Federation is as soon as the conflict starts.
Yeah, I like those scenes. I think it's something that works much better in the manga because Ryu... I mean, one, this is a rewrite of Ryu's backstory, because Ryu was not initially at the Battle of Loom, and I actually was watching some of First Gundam last night. He's someone who has only ever done 2, simulations, is what they say in the anime. So, like, this is different for him. In the manga, though, Ryu overall is beefed up as a character in a lot of ways. Like, they beef up his relationship with Hayato, they do a lot of stuff. They make him a little more experienced, so that when you get this in the origin, it makes more sense. It feels more seated. It felt a little out of the blue when I first watched it 3 years ago. It still feels a little out of the blue now. And like it being Ryu, I think the voice, it's a recast again. It's a guy named Miyu Tanaka does this. And I think he's a younger actor, but he does this like kind of, I think the voice he's trying to do for Ryu makes him sound weirdly old. And so like almost like it would be Ryu's dad here or something. Like I think it's a little off. And overall, I just think the scene, it feels like a tiny bit of a non sequitur. Whereas like I think the OVA might have been better served here just having an original character here who isn't someone from First Gundam, because I think it distracts a little bit when there isn't that like the ties in the manga to kind of like seed it in there. I don't know. That was kind of my feeling. It felt much more natural to me reading it in the manga than it does watching it in the anime.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that like I like the dynamic, because also since in the manga there's not as much of the like big crazy battle stuff. I mean, there is still a lot of it, but since it's not animation gets to like really go over the top with some of that stuff. There is more of a sense of you seeing a lot of the battle basically from his POV. That works like that in the manga. And then, yeah, again, like I agree with you with the voice doesn't work for me. And I feel like it's something where as a like cameo, the vocal performance would be fine. But in the manga, I really love the sequence of where he is stranded in space and his little monologue he has. And it just, the way it's performed in the anime, that monologue falls like completely flat for me. So yeah, I think I'm with you that it's the way it's implemented in the OVA is rough. But the manga version of that sequence I really like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One moment I forgot to say that I just absolutely love is that when the Federation people on the ships first see a Zaku flying through the air, you have one of them looks out the window and says, "Are those people?" And then a Zaku comes up and like he sees the eye and gets killed. I love that idea. I love them. They have never seen mobile suits in combat, and they go, "What is that? Are those? Oh God!" Right? It's very good.
Yeah. Although I think that's one of those things that, like, the way that they've messed with the timeline, it always is, like, it's hard to notice, like, does it make sense that they would be so surprised by the deployment of mobile suits since, like, mobile suits have been used multiple times in combat at this point at those colonies and stuff, and you guys have your own mobile suits in the gun cannons? There's some of that stuff that, like, feels like it feels a little bit off to me because of how much like the history of this stuff has been retconned, not just by the origin, but like over the years with the movies and different versions of the story have always kind of changed a little bit of like where and how much mobile suits have been involved, because the original idea is that like this is basically the first time that mobile suits have ever been used in combat at all. And so it would make sense for it to be super surprising. Whereas here, there's something about that sequence that I like it, but it doesn't feel like it's totally like connects to the timeline we've seen as presented by the origin with how prevalent mobile suits have already become before the Battle of Loom starts.
Here's what I would say. If it were General Revel saying that, it would make no sense because he's cued into all of this. It's a random like foot soldier on the ship who is probably not privy to seeing some of the other stuff, like certainly not the battle on the moon or something like that. You are right that obviously, and this would be an inconsistency even in First Gundam, that the mobile suits were used for stuff like the colony drop, which happens before Loom. So they have been out there before. But I think it gets the overall effect of this is the first time they are used en masse as an attack fleet versus ships in space. So it worked for me in that sense.
Yeah, I think there's just something about like the way that scene, like the specific wording and the way it's performed makes it feel like it's supposed to be, oh my God, they're using mobile suits. Rather than it's like, I can't believe they're using mobile suits in this way. Like there's like a nuance in that difference that for me, like it maybe kind of raised my eyebrow a bit because it just felt like it didn't fit entirely like the timeline. Because you're right, like technically a like random sailor on this ship maybe wouldn't know all that stuff. But that also is like, as like a storytelling tool, that feels like a weird thing that like have to make that mental leap of like, how much would this random guy have known about the degree to which Zakus have been deployed versus like what we have seen and how much we have seen them already be used in the war. I just thought it was like a little bit off.
Well, because after this we get a series of scenes with Giran Zabi, one with Kycilia, one with Degwin. And I know we have sung the praises of Ginga Banjo all over all 6 episodes of this thing. I think his best work is in this one. He has so many good scenes because he is now like fully in the Giran Zabi from Gundam 79 mode where the war is on, he's on top, and he thinks no one and nothing can touch him. And I kind of love this mode of, and I think Ginga Banjo is so good at this, of he is genuinely intimidating, but he's also a fucking idiot. And
Yes.
that is kind of I feel like that is the purpose of the scene with Kycilia, which the scene with Kycilia is obviously foreshadowing to when Kycilia is going to kill Girin in Gundam 79, because in this moment you have Kycilia realize you had the Great Degwin out there in front of the TNM ships, in front of the TNM fleet, and she says, what if they had decided to make a suicide run? And Girin says, I think you know what would have happened. And Kycilia pulls on the mask for actually the first time in the Origin and is like, this motherfucker. And what's great about that scene is that it's followed by this little moment where you do see Admiral TNM in the TNM fleet. He's looking at the Great Degwin. They're kind of in this standoff. And basically he's presented with this choice of, we don't know how many ships they have here, but we could probably destroy them, and then Zeon, Zoom City, is undefended. We could end the war. And they're wondering, could it be a trap? Because the Great Degwin is out here. Why would they ever do that? And it's basically a fake-out maneuver. The Great Degwin is there to scare TNM, and it works, because this is one thing Girin is right about, which is that the Federation are cowards and hypocrites. And I think that's a good moment.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually like one place where I think the anime improves a little bit on the manga by adding that scene, because all that stuff happens in the manga except for you don't actually see the scene from TNM's perspective. You just get it all in dialogue between Girin and Kycilia, and then you have Degwin and Garma on the ship, where Garma is like freaking the fuck out constantly, and he's so hyper, and Degwin's calming him down and talking him through like the potential pathways that this could go. And he says, like, but the TNM fleet is still in front of us. If they do like a kind of like a suicidal charge, and they decide to commit their forces fully here, like, we could still be killed and we might lose this war. And immediately after, in the manga, immediately after he says that, a guy comes in and announces that the TNM fleet has turned around and is retreating. Whereas in the anime, they add in that little scene where you see from TNM's perspective, which I like in that it gives you that, like, feeling of the different perspective that the Federation in the Zeon has, right? That Zeon is fighting a war of pure desperation, whereas, like, the Earth Federation doesn't need to be desperate. Like, if they were being desperate, they might have ended the war right there, but nobody wants to go charge in and die if they don't have to. So the Federation is like, like, we can turn around, as he says, like, we'll fight another day. Like, the Federation has such a massive resource advantage over the Zeons that they can afford to fight a war of attrition the way that Zeon can't. So even though it is a thing that if he had committed his forces, he maybe could have ended the war there, like, almost certainly the admiral would have been killed in that attack. It's like, I don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. And I think adding in that little scene with TNM, I really like. I think fleshes out the full dynamics of that moment.
It's surprising that's not in the manga, because one of my favorite things in the manga is how much time Yasuhiko spends with some of the admirals. Like, TNM is more of a character. Joaquin is way more of a character in the manga and has really cool stuff. So it's a little surprise. I forgot that isn't in the manga, but it's a very good little moment. You also have Girin with Degwin in a scene that foreshadows their scene from Gundam 79, where they have the talk about Hitler, where Degwin invokes it in a slightly different way here, where Degwin is like, all right, time to sue for peace. And Girin's like, fuck off, no one's suing for peace. And Degwin says, well, you're acting like a tyrant like Napoleon or Hitler who didn't know when enough was enough. And then Girin has this just great line where he says, the failures of ancient history offer us no lessons. And then he talks about, we're going to go forward, tada maye, maye. And Ginga Banjo is just very, very good, is what I kept writing in my notes.
Yeah, because this is where, as you say, they foreshadow that scene, because that's the scene from the anime where Degwin makes the full Hitler comparison, and Girin doesn't know anything about Hitler, and then like the end of that scene being Degwin being, Hitler lost, he died, and Girin just like storming out annoyed. That scene is still in the manga, so it is also like presaging the scene quite literally. It's not just a reference to that scene in the anime or anything. But yes, I like the consistency of here Girin's sort of portrayal, and that this is where he becomes the Girin Zabi we know, right? This is where he becomes the Hitler analog fully. I think like it's this, and then the scene afterwards where he's giving the speech to all the soldiers is he has like fully drunk his own Kool-Aid. I always get the impression that with Girin, he used the sort of master race rhetoric around new types and space noids and all of that purely as a propaganda tool originally, and I think like slowly over time, because every time he's pushed the boundaries a little bit, he's gotten away with it, that he's become so kind of like drunk on his own power and authority that I think at this point he like has fully believes in it, and he fully believes in his own like inherent superiority and the superiority of the people that choose to follow him, whether or not they're actually technically space noids, as we'll talk about, where there's a contrast between who he considers space noids that are important, and then other two people are also space noids. It's like, it's fine if we kill people in that colony, whatever, even though, you know, there's a clear hypocrisy in that, in the philosophy he's espousing. But I think that this dynamic of him having fully taken control of the reins of power and being completely ignorant of the, like, ways in which this is basically inevitably going to go wrong, and Degwin sitting there on his throne, Degwin is an academic, he is someone who studied history, he knows all this stuff, he knows exactly where this is leading, but he's powerless to do anything about it.
It's very good, and overall, like, and it is a good historical analog. I mean, Gurren is Hitler at this point in what he is doing, in the like, the ambition is so high, it's nondescript also, right? Like, it is evil without an end point, right? Like, and this is very true, I think, in Gundam 79, is I don't know what Gurren's end point is, other than, like, annihilation of all the humans on Earth at a certain point. Like, it's so, and there's always another step. There can't be an end point for this ideology, because that ideology relies on there being an enemy, right?
Yes, yeah. So he's constantly moving his own goalposts back and back and back and back, and this is one of the things that makes, like, Degwin's bid for peace, like, very limp and, like, ineffectual, is I think he's completely lost sight of, like, how severe it's gotten with Gurren, and I think Revel is, like, one of the only people who kind of understands, oh shit, like, this is a war we have to actually see through to the end, because this is not a war that people can afford to lose.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole, I mean, that's the impact of the end of this. I think this episode overall, and I think it's through the character of Revel and where we go with the Antarctic speech, is very good at reorienting us to the position of Gundam 79, which is like, the Federation ain't perfect, but those Zeons need to fucking lose. You know, like, this needs to end.
Yeah, because there's one beat that I think we kind of skipped over a little bit in the fight earlier, and I think it's partially because I think the anime doesn't emphasize it as much as the manga does, because I think it's a really important moment for Revel, but it's when the swarm of Zaku's comes in and flanks the fleet, and Revel at that moment realizes they have basically lost the battle, and he has this line where he says, Zeon, Osorubeshi, like, basically Zeon is a thing to be feared. And he says the line in that moment in the anime, but I think with the manga being, you know, just like, you know, snapshots of individual moments, there's a lot of weight on that moment in the manga that has always read to me as, like, that is the moment where Revel fully realizes how thoroughly he has underestimated what he's fighting, and, like, how severe this war actually is. That, like, this is how desperate Zeon is, this is how much they're committing themselves, and this is how, like, far they're willing to push themselves. And that I think he sees in that moment, like, oh, this is not a thing that's going to end in peace, like, in like a peace treaty. This is not a thing that's going to, like, end in just, like, giving Zeon its own independence. This is not a war for independence anymore. We're so far beyond that point. I think, like it's that moment when he says Zeon Osorubeshi is where he is committed to, I have to put an end to this war, because if we lose, it could mean, like, basically extermination of Earthnoids and, like, life on Earth as we have known it.
Revel is low-key, and always has been, one of my favorite side characters in Gundam, because I think he's so fascinating, because in Gundam 79, he is not a perfect man, but he is one of the few adults you meet who kind of gets it. I think you get the sense of, like, he gets... One, I think he has an actual empathy for, like, Amuro and friends in their situation that other adults don't have, but he also has an understanding of, like, the new type of it all and, like, what's going on, and he's interested in it. But he is also, like, brave and righteous in a way that you understand why everyone stands to attention when he comes in a room. It's not just out of courtesy, it's out of, like, he actually commands that. He has a goodness and a righteousness to him as a soldier. And I like the arc that is traced in the origin is subtle, but I like that he's sort of a background element, because he's not the top dog in the military yet in the origin. Mm-hmm. He's up there, but he's not the absolute top of it. and he's kind of feeling it out, and he feels a little asleep at the helm because he's not sure where this is going. And then in this episode, you see him wake up fully until he gives that speech and changes the course of human history, right? And I think that is like, it's such an interesting, it's the kind of thing where you want to read, like, what does the biography in the world of Gundam in, like, you know, Universal Century 100, like, or 0100, what does that look like for Revel? Because he would be such a key, interesting figure in its history, you know?
Yeah, because there's something about him, that I've always loved. There's like an inscrutability to the character that, because he's always been a supporting character, even here where he's like given more focus than he's ever been given in anything else, he still is like on the sidelines. You know, we don't get like the story from his POV. We don't like see his family or his background or anything. And there's also something about his design I've always just adored. That adds to his inscrutability because he's, you know, his face is completely covered in his beard and all that stuff. He's got this whole like kind of Santa Claus look going on. But he is the like one person amongst the Federation that feels like is actually motivated legitimately like by principle and not by greed or just like circumstance. That's something that we see consistently both in original Gundam and then also in the Origin, where every time we basically see any other person who's like a member of the top admiralty, they always feel kind of spineless, as Girin likes to describe them, or they're there to like make a buck, and they're only in that position probably through like nepotism, effectively, is always what it's felt. That it's this, very corrupt federation that has existed for such a long time, has not been meaningfully challenged by anything in over probably like hundreds of years, and it's just allowed to sort of like steep in its own corrupt decadence, and Revel is just this one rare man who is able to like work his way up enough to a position of power that when like this moment of history kind of like happens, he's able to use that to leverage enough power to fight, and he's like the only person in the Federation at any UC Gundam thing that is ever like that, right? It's like, it's everyone else that's in the member of the top admiralty is always like just a complete scumbag from this point on, that allows like the Titans to come about and stuff like that. And it's, like probably in many ways the worst thing that happened in the history of this world is that Revel gets killed at the end of the war, because I bet that the Federation afterwards would have been a much better place if Revel had still been there to like influence it.
I mean, he probably would have been like the Ulysses S. Grant of that world, of like, he would have become president or something, and like had the Ulysses S. Grant, president whose reputation has been historically salvaged in recent years for some of the better stuff he did. It turns out all the Ulysses S. Grant was a bad president was Southern propaganda, because he's the guy who defeated them. Yeah. Weird how that happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, he looks like Ulysses S. Grant. I wonder if that's like a conscious influence on it almost, he has that very wartime leader general kind of thing. Anyway, very cool character. We will have much more to say about him when we get to the end of the episode.
Yep.
I also wanted to talk about Sean in this moment where Degwin and Girin are talking. After Girin leaves the room, you have Kycilia come out from behind the curtain, behind where Degwin is sitting, like she's the fucking Phantom of the Opera. She's got her stupid mask on. It's so great. Girin basically tells her, like, he says he has become a fiend. No one can stop him but you. And she has this line where she says, "Your Kycilia will always be by your side." And I really like that moment, setting up this dynamic that will, I mean, eventually it'll end the war, right? It's the thing that will lead her to kill Girin and everything to fall apart, is because her real loyalties really begin and end with herself, but she does have affection for her father, even if she does not always do what is in his best interests. She's much more on his side than Girin's.
Yeah, it is an interesting, I think, wrinkle that the Origin presents, of where I think like it opens up a question of like, how much does Kycilia's loyalties legitimately lie with her father, and how much of that is like a play because she likes being in the shadows and manipulate things, and like her father is a figurehead, right? I mean, that's what he is at this point in Sion, is he's a figurehead. He's not like a legitimate political power, and that like he's not the person who actually makes any of the decisions of things that happen. That's like Girin foremost, and then Kycilia under that, because in the original Gundam, like, I always just read it completely as like Kycilia legitimately has affection for her father, and it's like legitimately motivated to act because she sees how monstrous Girin has become through that action. Whereas in Origin, I feel like some of the stuff, because after this point she says Cassilia will always be by your side, but then she immediately starts acting behind the scenes to perpetuate the war and is not doing anything to move against Girin or to end the war. That I think like adds this other wrinkle of how much of that relationship with her father is that from 0079 Gundam, or is it being sort of more reframed here as another put on that she has for like another like play, another plan, another scapegoat in manipulating her father the way she manipulates everybody else.
Well, because the manga, if you haven't read it, some of the stuff it does at the Battle of Abao Aku, I think is really smart in showing that, like, she has additional reasons for wanting Girin dead beyond he killed her dad. That is, one, I do think, like, in general, she probably does have a certain code of, like, it's bad to kill your dad, right? Like, because she is someone who operates behind the scenes in a certain way. But also, like, that is a good pretense for her to take out a gun and shoot Girin in the head and then take command at this pivotal moment. And there's so much extra stuff done in the Origin about the overall, like, politics and strategy that you can read it one of two ways or a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, because I'll say that when I read the manga, I very much, when I got to that sequence, read it as a more, the death of her father is like the political excuse she needed to leverage that as to be able to use to assassinate Girin, and then leverage that as like a legitimate political act rather than it just being a thing of her like a mad grab for power, which I think it is a mad grab for power. Yes. I kind of honestly, I don't really read it too much as of her actually having a commitment to her father, because I think there's too much that she does that clearly moves against Degwin's interests. I think for me to read it as being she's actually by his side. She doesn't feel like that to me, at least.
Well, and this is one place where the OVA has a little bit of trouble, not by anything it does wrong, but because it doesn't have the rest of the manga surrounding it. So, honestly, because of the way the anime, the OVA calls to the 79 anime a lot, sometimes you're thinking more of Caecilia's original characterization, whereas this is all plucked from a story where, as you say, she does have a slightly different characterization in Yasuhiko's telling, which is totally fine, but it's a little more... Because I agree. I think I probably agree with you. You've read the manga much more recently. You just read it, right? Yeah. And so I'm kind of working on... There's 5 different versions of the Gundam story in my head as I'm watching this. So
yeah, because I will say that in this OVA, I do think that like the scene that happens after this with Makabe, I think like in the anime it reads slightly weird to me for this exact reason, because it's like the juxtaposition with this like I am always by your side, which feels like this is a thing that like genuinely 0079 original version of Cassilia like genuinely would say that and actually mean it, whereas this Cassilia, it's like in stuff that's also happened before this in the manga, as you're getting up to it, there's more that where you feel that she is very much a person that is out entirely for herself. She's just better at disguising it than Girin is. But I think not all that characterization is like fully here yet in the anime version, so there's like a little bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, which is and that's okay. It's a weird overall production, and like I like the version in the manga and I like the version in the anime, and I don't think there's like one true version, but like this OVA exists in this kind of weird in between space, which is a little inevitable. It's not a bad thing, but it's interesting. You have this whole amazing scene in Daikun Hall, which is the big location where, like, in the original anime, you have Garma's funeral and stuff, and I think this version is what Yasuhiko draws in the manga, where he's made it a little bit crazier and even more over the top and gnarly, and I think that's such a cool location. You see it several times in the manga, and I love that we get this big scene here. And this is where they hold the victory celebration, where Char comes in and is announced as the Ace of Aces, the Red Comet, the dashing cape of a field officer is now fluttering on his shoulders, and everyone is annoyed because all the girls are running to Char, who is very bemused, and all the Black Tri-Stars are very angry, and I think this is a very good scene.
Yeah, I love everything in this whole sequence. Like let's just focus on the Char and Garma of it, because I love
the Char and Garma
interaction. Because there was a brief scene earlier where Garma is in an argument with Dozol, and Garma wants to get put into the position that he eventually is put into, which is he is part of the Earth invasion forces, and so he's part of like the land troops or whatever that are going to do a colony operation, and then after that he will be put onto Earth. And so he's been put into a position that he actually wants to be, that will allow him to gain like legitimate military prestige through his own accomplishments, which is what he wants, that he can compete with Char. And then at the party, you know, Char is there getting fawned over by like every woman basically at the party. And then Garma walks up. And I love the way the anime does it, of where there's all these women around him, and then Garma walks up and just like, I rewound and watched the scene like 3 or 4 times just to watch the expressions on all the different background characters of like, it basically feels like all those women are like secret like otaku ladies that like totally ship Char and Garma also, because it's like they're all sit back watching this conversation with utter fascination on their faces, because it's like, because they realize that the one true ship has arrived and they're not a part of it, and they just get to like sit back and admire as Char and Garma sort of spar with each other. And Garma bragging about the fact that he's going to be on Earth, and I've got my entire command under me, and Char saying it's like, it's going to be like dirty and bloody work, not fitting like a young a rich boy like you. It's just, that whole scene I think is just fucking fantastic.
It's a fantastic scene. It's great in the manga where you have this amazing panel that it's almost a full page panel that ends it of the two of them looking at each other longingly. Garma with his like has to look up at Char a little bit because Char's taller, and Char's looking down in bemusement, and they're both holding a drink, and the anime has a fucking field day with that panel, turning it into like 10 different shots of them looking at each other, and just the expressions on their faces are so good. In the anime, it really does feel like a missing scene from First Gundam that we didn't see, of the two of them having their fun verbal sparring, but now with the full context the Origin has given about how they got to that point. And it just, that's one of those prequel elements that just adds so much and fits. You don't have to adjust anything about First Gundam. It just slots right in so perfectly to everything First Gundam does with those characters, you know?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that the anime version does here as well, where I think it adds a bit more sort of like direct foreshadowing into, because it's, again, the positioning of all this stuff is different, because in the manga this is after Garma has already been killed by Char, whereas in this anime version we're seeing it entirely as a prequel. So they add in a little bit more of like kind of shots that feel like is clearly foreshadowing Char thinking about killing Garma. In particular, they put a really good one on Char has a line where he says it's a dangerous assignment. And the shot of him in the anime as he says that is him like kind of looking down on him at Garma with like a slight smirk on Char's face that basically looks like the expression he has when like he fucking does the pettiest thing Char has ever done in Gundam, which is unplugging the the communications cable, and like him just sort of like looking down at it and smirking as Garma's like desperately trying to call in and get reinforcements of it. They just like animate him to like kind of make that more of a direct foreshadowing or kind of callback to those elements, and I love that. Like, I just love how petty and fucking how Sharma this scene is. It just encapsulates everything that's fun about their relationship dynamic in this one dumb party scene.
I don't know how the Gundam Cafe in Japan never had an item on its menu called Sharma, which was shawarma, but it's like it's like a bunch of like pieces of chicken in the sauce, like in the shape of Char and Garma and a heart together. It's Sharma. Oh, they're so good. I love it. This whole scene is great. I love that like it's just low-key playing some Beethoven in the background of this scene, because all the Zeon nobles like to pretend they're so high and mighty, Original Gundam 79 would do some of the like kind of fake classical in some of those scenes, so I think it's very funny. Yeah.
And then the other side of this scene is Girin, like through all of this stuff, Girin is giving this speech that is his full-on Hitler master race speech, right? Yes. Like, this is where his rhetoric has completely turned to, we are the space noids, we are the people who are, like, inheriting the will of Daikun, we are, like, the superior race, and we must, like, wipe out, basically, the people on Earth, and bring about, like, a true and ultimate victory. And I think one thing I think the anime is, with its editing, able to put an even sharper point on this, is that entire speech about space noid superiority is immediately juxtaposed with Garma being sent to this one of the other colonies at Loom that has not been totally subjugated yet, and going into the colony with a fleet of troops and like some Zakus and tanks and stuff, and just killing people. and just basically massacring what little like kind of guerrilla resistance is there in a bunch of the citizens, and you just see a bunch of like innocent civilians running away, trying to escape, many of them getting killed, and like the immediate hypocrisy that's drawn there, which is true of any of these kinds of fascist ideologies of like the master race or whatever, is that those lines that are drawn by that ideology are completely arbitrary, and they extend as far as the whim of the person who is drawing them and using it as a propaganda tool. And so, the immediate contrast of we are like the superior race, we're the space noids, like we are better than anybody else. Anyways, now we're murdering a bunch of other space noids over here, and let's not think about the hypocritical elements of that in our own ideology. Like it's a very, I think, like sharp and very powerful juxtaposition.
Oh, absolutely. There's some astonishing shots of like civilians running away with the shell casings from a Zaku falling down, a la very reminiscent of the obviously famous moment in F91 where one hits the woman on the head, because it almost happens here. And you have Garma, he's a, I don't know if Garma has any actual ideology, but he is full on with this because hey, he's finally getting some glory, and it is a gross scene, but that is where Garma has made his bed.
Yeah, of where he is like no longer thinking of the people he's fighting as people, right? He's in the like they are the enemy mode, and they're just like an obstacle that must be tread over in order for him to get like the success he wants. And like this is like the last of that, right? We have seen that happen with like all the kind of major characters on the Xeon side bit by bit. Like we had that with Dozel in his like big like dramatic scene of him realizing the horror of what he's done, and then the only way to survive it is to rationalize it and then not care. And we see that echoed at the end of the fight in this episode, and now we see that exact same rationalization happening to Garma, that he wants glory, he wants fame, he wants to perform and like reflect well on his family, and so he has kind of abandoned his like humanity in order to do that, and he doesn't seem to have noticed that that's even happened.
Nope. The final stretch of this episode mostly deals with the sort of politics and espionage around what will become the Antarctic speech, right?
Yeah.
The Zeon is exhausted speech. So you have these dual scenes that are intercut with Degwin visiting Revel in the prison and Makuve in the museum where Kycilia comes in. Both great scenes, but I need to point out right at the beginning, the funniest thing in all of the Origin is this little bit of art design where on the prison, it's you have this establishing shot of the prison, and it says on the sign in big letters, you can't miss it, Principality of Xeon, the prison. It doesn't say like Principality of Xeon, prison. It's Principality of Xeon, the prison, which immediately made me think of things like in the Spaceballs movie, where you have Spaceballs the t-shirt, Spaceballs the breakfast cereal, Spaceballs the flamethrower. The kids love that one, and I just love that idea of it's Principality of Xeon, the prison.
Yes, yeah, and that is an establishing shot that only exists in the anime. And yeah, it is very funny. The notion of like we've just got the one. It's the prison. We only had the money to build a single prison for the entirety of the Republic of Xeon, or the Principality of Xeon. Excuse me.
It's so good. I love this scene with Degwin and Revel. That we've had several moments throughout the series with Degwin and Revel where I think they sort of get each other, or at the very least, Degwin believes Revel is a kindred spirit, that they're both men cut from the same cloth, from the same generation. They get it. And in this scene, you totally get that sense of, like, Degwin senses, Revel's going to be on my side. Revel's going to get all this. Revel just kind of stays quiet, and obviously Revel is past all of this shit. Revel's not going to say anything bad to Degwin here because Degwin's going to let him go, but Revel is thinking about how probably wants to fucking kill this guy, right?
Yeah, that Degwin, and this is, I think, just such a good piece of characterization on Degwin's part, that he is, like, he's so naive here. Like, his belief that, like, there could be a peace treaty where, again, like, let's remind ourselves that the Zeons, like, a week before this, wiped out half of the population of the planet Earth. It's like, you're so far past the point of where there's some sort of, like, a normal peace treaty, and we could just sort of like sign this and pretend it never happened and go our separate ways. Because one, Giran wouldn't ever let that happen. There's absolutely no way Giran would allow that to happen. And two, the people on Earth wouldn't let that happen. Like, even if the Admiralty of the Federation wanted it to, there's no way that that could fucking happen, because the crimes of what's been committed here and the threat that Xeon represents is so immense. But Degwin has no perspective on any of that shit. Like, he's totally lost sight of the scale of what has occurred here.
Yeah. And so this entire, like, final... It's something I love. This entire final act of Gundam the Origin is started by Degwin wanting these peace talks, and then everybody else, literally everybody, Kycilia and Girin, but also all of the people on Earth like Gop and Makuve and Char at one point, all of them have a vested interest in letting this war go on, whether for material reasons, whether for genuine ideological reasons like Revel and Girin in the opposite bad direction, or someone like Char who's like, I don't want the war to end, I'm having a ball, right? So all of them want it to continue, and all of them take the opportunity Degwin in his naivety has given them, and they run 100 miles with it. And I think it is such a smart piece of... Because it is basically like a sort of espionage politics story, those two kind of like subgenres that are kind of related put together for these last half hour, and it's so many delicious, interesting scenes to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, as you say, this sequence is intercut with Kycilia talking to Makuve, basically setting up of that Makuve is the guy who's going to go to Earth to negotiate the Antarctic Treaty, but she's telling him, it's like, but like, that's just a pretense. Like, really, you are there to set up our Earth invasion forces, because Makuve is the only person amongst like the Xeon forces that like actually admires or appreciates like the cultural and historical value of Earth, and also is, you know, he's the opposite of Girin. It's like Makuve understands and knows history, so he's not going to like be destroyed by, you know, losing sight of the lessons learned from that past. I think is part of the idea there, and that, you know, I mean, having immediately intercut of, oh yeah, we're going to have peace, and I'm going to send you there to have peace, and then cut to Kycilia, we're definitely not going to have peace. This is just a pretense. We're sending you there, so you're like the advanced stages of our eventual invasion of Earth.
Yes, I mean, Makuve literally has these two questions he asks at the end of the sequence, one of which is, well, what do I do if there's no enemy to fight? And she says, and I think this is the first of two, like, thesis statements of the episodes. She says to him, regardless of the time or place, mankind has a fundamental desire for war. Whether that be foolish or wise, plans are already in motion to prolong the war. And then she also lets him know, because she says, I respect you. Girin, I find him detestable. A line that, of course, is a lift from the original series, and is delicious here.
I love this. It's like, watashi wa giren sotsu yo skane. So she says it in this very like high-minded way of
yes,
you know, the word ski, which is to like, but skanu, which is this like very fancy way of making it negative. And
which is why they use the big word detestable in English. It's a good translation. Yeah.
Yes. And I like in the manga in particular, she says that line like 4 or 5 times. She says that to quite a few people.
Yes.
And I like it every single time. It's like, it's, you know, it's her way of sort of like, she says it to anybody that she brings into her confidence to like let them know, like, we're going to the top, basically. Like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, at the end of this, we're the ones who will be in control, not Girin. Yeah, and it's good.
Makuve, I fucking love this scene. It's very good. It's primo Makuve stuff. In general, I guess we'll talk about this next week, Sean, when we talk about the manga. Makuve is very true to his character from the anime, but has a very different narrative role in the manga, mainly because of how they've reoriented the Odessa Day stuff. And I don't know about you, Sean, I love the Makuve stuff in the manga. I don't necessarily prefer it to the anime, but I do like it a lot, and I think there's some really good moments. And in general, his characterization is just so on point, and I think it extends to this scene, it extends to the voice work. I love that he is just hanging out in a museum, looking at art, going, that's fake. That's fake. Yes. I love the idea of there being a museum in the Universal Century where a bunch of like knickknacks and trinkets, like stuff that was sold at like gift shops in our day and age, becomes like they start to believe it's actual history. My favorite moment being the curator is pointing at like basically a Japanese kabuki mask or a theater mask and being like, this is Roman. And Makuve just goes, and you know what he's actually thinking because he probably knows what he's talking about. That whole scene is great.
Yeah, because you know, I'll say like one thing with Makuve, because I do like a lot of the stuff they do in the manga with him, but I always, you know, I feel bad for him that in both the movies and in the manga, his best shit got cut because he's not at the Duel of Texas, and they like the movie version, they have him die at the end of the Battle of Edessa, which like in many ways makes sense, but it's like the entire reason the Gyan exists is to have a cool duel with the Gundam, and it's just like it's always frustrating that one of the best things in Mobile Suit Gundam just never ends up getting adapted. So it's like I feel bad for him in that respect, but yes, this scene is very juicy, and I think one of the things I really love, he sort of the like philosophy he espouses that is very like I think encapsulates Makabe as a character as he's always been going back to the original anime, is him saying, you know, that the Universal Century's history extends not even a full 100 years, and that is why people mock us, like basically, you know, people living in space, that they don't have like actual history. And so he like part of his goal in going to Earth is to like accumulate that history and to like incorporate it into their own, right? And it's this like interesting kind of like cultural perspective that we don't get much of, because it's such a war-focused series, and the characters are all predominantly soldiers or people who've been conscripted as soldiers. There aren't a lot of people that we encounter in Gundam that are like concerned with culture as a thing. And I like that Makabe is the character who like he thinks about and is concerned with culture, but it's also in this very like consumptive, predatory way that he like uses it as like a weapon of like status, and wants to like possess it. So it's like he's the character who's interested in culture, but it's in this very like kind of gross, possessive way that you know is why he's fairly like a slimy character.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the thing that works for me about how the manga does it, and maybe this is more a conversation for next week, but the thing that works for me is that I think Yasuhiko understands the character so well and puts such a good fine point on all of that, that it would feel even weirder if he were still just hanging out with Zeon by the point of the duel in Texas. And so I think he squares the circle well within the specific version of the story being told in the manga, where he still gets the Gyan in there in a phenomenal little moment. And you all know how much I love the Gyan, so I'm always there for more Gyan. I think it's obviously a better use of the character than like the movies do, which mostly just cut him. Other than I think they do keep the vase line in there somewhere.
Yes,
but yeah, it's good stuff. We'll talk about that more next week. But yes, I do like having Makabe here. We have our scene with Char and Dozle, where Dozle officially recruits Char under his wing, which is where he is at the beginning of First Gundam. He's working for Dozle, and he is given his orders for Operation V. You have some primo Shuichi Keita lines here, like him saying, "Earth doesn't agree with me, I'm a space noid through and through." His whole like way he's kind of buttering up Dozle. It's very good. I love the little robot they have on the table that prints out the orders, Char reads them, and then gives it back to the robot who shreds it. That's such a great little fucking touch. This is what I mean. There's so much like fun, like space espionage stuff here. And this is where you get the full prequelization of Char Aznable, where he is given his ship, the Falmer, a Musai that surpasses all other Musais, according to Dozle. He's given free reign on this mission, do whatever it takes to find and destroy Operation V. He gets Lieutenant Dren, he gets his whole ship and crew and Slender and everyone else, and he is off, and there's some really, really good stuff here.
Yeah, I like this stuff. I do also think it ends up slowing down the pacing of the episode a bit too much for me, though. It's like it's a little bit too on the nose prequel-y, you know, of like, we gotta get every little piece back into its puzzle of like, this is where he gets his Musai, this is where he gets Dren, this is where he has the conversation where he makes Dren acting captain, and all of this stuff that's like, it's like, I guess it's fun to see, but it also just doesn't feel like it like reflects much about the larger story being told specifically in this episode of the OVA to me.
Maybe not, but on the other hand, in his speech to the crew, Char has this line, "I am a warrior of the cosmos, a knight who races at will across the heavens faster than any ship." And this whole scene could be garbage, and if Shuichi Ikeda just got to say that line, it would still be worth it. So that is my counterpoint to you.
Yeah, I mean, he does say Amakakeru Senshida, which is like, yes, the warrior who rides across like the heavens, basically, which is a very good line. Like, yeah, it's the thing that it's a little, I think that's kind of what I mean by, and I will say, like, I also don't particularly love these scenes in the manga either. I just think it's like a little bit too on the nose prequel. It's like, it's because it's not telling a story, by putting these pieces in their puzzle. It's just putting the pieces in the puzzle is kind of like what it feels like to me. Like now we're at the point where he has to get this, and that, and the other thing, and we have to see him get the Operation V orders. All things that are like only interesting because I like Gundam, right? It's not like interesting in and of itself, I guess is what I mean.
No, and I do see what you mean, that it is not strictly related to the Revel plot, although Char will intersect with it in a little bit. But I feel like it's important for the arc of this OVA, at least, to have at least place Char where he's going to be, because everyone else is. You have this, big closing montage where you kind of, have everyone in place for the events. And I think it's, I don't know. And some of it's just the fanboy in me that when Shuichi Keita says Dren Shui or Dren Kancho, I love it. They picked all these names for characters that sound uniquely good coming out of Shuichi Keita's mouth, like Doren and Selender. It's, so I just love it. It works for me.
Yeah, I think I just would have liked a way for that to, like, more naturally fit into a story being told rather than it feeling like it feels like fan service to me, I guess is what it is.
But it's very good fan service. Sure. So Caecilia, next we have basically the big operation, which I have to talk about this for a second. Caecilia's operation to spring Revel and put all this in motion, she calls it Operation Bluebird, which she says she has named because it's the first... Bluebird was the name of the first film made jointly by the US and the USSR in the Cold War. So naturally I had to go research that, Sean. And that is true. That is a true history fact. I don't know if it's actually the first film made jointly by the US and USSR. It is one of the only ones. I don't know if it was the absolute first, but it was a joint production of Len Film and 20th Century Fox, released in 1976, directed by George Cukor, starring Elizabeth Taylor, Jane Fonda, Ava Gardner, and Cicely Tyson. It's based on a 1908 Maurice Maeterlinck play. And it was basically a producer did this program through a UK cultural exchange program to co-produce between the USSR and US. My favorite historical detail here is that the producer Edward Lewis initially hired Arthur Penn to direct, and the Soviets said that man is too liberal, and George Cukor was hired as a non-political compromise. I found that very funny.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because one thing that's interesting is that also is an original line to the anime. That scene is setting it up isn't even in the manga. So like that is like an interesting little because that was one where I know that right now because I'm scrolling through the manga looking for the scene to look at it, because I didn't realize, because even though I just read this sequence like weeks or like 2 weeks or so before I watched the episode, that scene fits so naturally in what happens that I didn't even realize that wasn't even in the manga. Yeah. It's a very good little beat to like just. I think it like it's nice because it very like clearly establishes the nature of what is happening with Revel. Just like in case someone is a little bit confused about what's happening, which is that it is Xeon people disguised as Federation people breaking him out of the prison to then take him to an actual Federation ship that is waiting like somewhere by the moon. And so yes, it is this joint operation between like the two kind of like spy agencies on either side of the war in order to like get the war to continue. Yes.
And it actually does go much better than the actual Bluebird. I don't know if Caecilia should have chosen that as an operation name because the movie did not go well. It was produced on location in Moscow and Leningrad, and everybody got sick. Elizabeth Taylor dealt with amoebic dysentery throughout filming, and later insisted they reshoot all her scenes in post in London. There's like all this. It was like a disaster for production. It was a total flop. Critics didn't like it. Caecilia's operation goes much better than the actual movie.
Yeah, it would have been great if it went sideways because one of the soldiers had dysentery, and it's just like, oh god, I know this is just awful timing. I wish I had realized before I was deployed on the mission, but it's like I really, I've got a bad situation going on here. So sorry, we got it. Can we do this again? Like maybe we can retry this when you're in like our London prison over here, because it's just not today.
My favorite detail about this movie, Sean, nothing about Gundam, but my favorite little detail is the producer convinced the USSR's production company, Len Film, to do the movie by promising that they would cast Marlon Brando as the main character. They didn't. Marlon Brando wasn't in it, but he promised that. And this would have been 1976. This is when everyone's trying to get Brando. Like, Superman the movie is going to pay him however many
This
millions.
is when, also, you're not going to fucking get Marlon Brando to do this.
No.
Yeah,
no.
There's no way.
So, that's my favorite little detail. A lot of lying going on. Anyway, you have this whole sequence where Revel gets sprung from prison, and then you have this scene that I'm surprised you didn't like, Sean. We got to talk about it, where Char finds Revel in space. I really love this little scene. I think it's a delicious little moment. But we can.
I think for me, it's just a little bit too much. It's like it's a bit extra. I think it's a thing of where, you know, there has been this thing in the Origin prequel stuff of like putting Char like very close to like the things that are causing the 1 year war to happen, and I think it's like it's on this line of that being like, is it a little bit too much and a little bit too much to like make him responsible for this, that, or the other thing? And generally I've been fine with it. This is one place where, and I think it's like how much the sequence plays out. Like it's so much happens. It would be one thing if it was like Char notices it happening on his ship and he doesn't do anything and lets it go and has his line about like, oh, I almost stepped on like the most impressive piece of political theater of the 20th century or whatever, or of this century. But like the whole, and he like they disable the ship and he boards it and he gets on and the one guy tries to pull the gun and Char, like it's cool. It's very cool, but it's so much for this that it's like it was a thing that honestly when I read the manga, because I remembered this scene and I remember feeling this way about this the first time watching the Origin, that I was really surprised that it is there in all of those elements are there in the manga, because it always felt like a thing that was added for the OVA in order to make Char more central, because he kind of doesn't have anything to do outside of the first 20 minutes of this episode. So I always assumed it was added in to give him a thing to do in the last episode of the Origin. I just like there's something about it that it is like a little bit too over the top for me and draws too much focus away from what I think is more like the core of what is happening here with the espionage and Revel and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I could not disagree more. I love this scene. I love the overall pace of it. I love the slow build of they're in the debris field behind the moon doing firing tests. They realize it's a real, like, moving Salamis. They're very confused. Why is this thing out here in the middle of space? They stop the ship. They fire on it. There's all this stuff. They board it. You have a lot of just good back and forth between Char and Dren. Char goes out in his Zaku. You get this phenomenal shot, this extreme low angle of his Zaku stepping down on the ship with the sun behind him. And he's interrogating them. He's like, you know, in full Char Aznable mode. Why have you snuck into the very heart of Zeon? I think that scene where the guy tries to shoot him and he shoots back, I love. Is it extra? Yeah, but so is Char Aznable. It's basically like there's this scene in Deadwood where a guy tries to pull a gun on Wild Bill Hickok when Hickok is set in the right place with his back to the wall, and he pulls so fast that, you know, the guy can't even see him and kills him. And it's basically the exact same thing here with Char, only with his, like, stupid sword gun thing he has on his hip that he never actually really uses in the anime, but looks cool. So I love all of that. And then what I love is there's this build and build and build, and then Revel enters, and Char is astonished for a second. He gets it. He goes, sorry about that, and leaves, basically. There's this great, like, back and forth between him and Revel, where Revel says, yes, I am Revel. What will you do with that knowledge? Zeon officer who is faithful to his duty. And they're, like, talking past each other, but they both know what they're talking about. Char leaves, and I think what makes the scene for me is the punchline when he says, that was a treasure ship that was far too rich for my blood. We came very close to ruining a brilliant bit of political theater. And I think that him intersecting with that and letting it go on, two things. I just think it's a great production of a sequence. I love the overall, you know, wartime espionage flavor of it with that build, and then the release when Revel gets in and Char, being Char, realizes what's going on. I also think it is thematically important that in the overall thematic tapestry of the episode, where you have all these characters affirmatively choosing to let the war go on and not take the off-ramp, that Char, being one of our main characters in the OVA, is one of those who sees this moment, and of course he is like kind of overjoyed to see this bit of political theater going on that he can step back and let go on uninhibited. And then there's a scene I believe that is added only in the anime and it's not in the manga, where he tells everyone on the ship to be watching Revel's speech and he's kind of reveling in it. I think it works very well in the overall arc of the episode, and I just think it's a great scene on its own.
I think for me, my problem with it is like, it's just the whole, it feels a bit contrived or something. Like it's such an incredible coincidence that his ship just happens to be in the sector where the ship waiting for Revel is like, there's just something about that feels like there's, because I agree that thematically it's important, which is why I'm saying, like, I would be fine with it if it like was constructed in such a way that it felt more believable that this could have happened, because it just makes Char so important. It's like that, like, he so completely dominates this moment, and he so eats it and owns it out of, like, in a way that feels like it's just given to him. And it's like, it just feels like the story is contorted in such a way, like, to the benefit of Char as a character, that makes it also feel a bit like fan servicey to me. That it just like, it's not to me a believable sequence of events. It kind of breaks, I think, a little bit like the grounded political, like, military realism of, like, a lot of the way that these sequences are constructed. And I wish that they delivered some of, like, the thematic stuff in a way that felt more natural to me than just, we're out here in the middle of nowhere doing a random training exercise. We just happen to stumble on this ship right when it's picking up Revel, and are able to completely take control of the scenario, and then let it go on its, like, merry way. I think that it's like, that's what I mean by it's like a bit extra, or it's a bit too much to me.
Yeah, that's just not a problem I ever really even thought about with it. It was fine for me. Yeah. Because I don't know, like, if there's a little extra coincidence and stuff in there, like, I think Char's a character you can get away with that on, is for me, is like, he is a bit extra as a character. Things happen around him and to him and with him. It is also like, this is a 6-episode production where he is ostensibly your lead character. I think it makes sense for him to be a key figure in this final act. Like,
yeah, I guess I think that, like, it just feels like there are opportunities to have created a moment like this, like, closer to the escape itself or something like that, where it would make sense that Char would intersect with this plot, rather than these two things happening completely disconnected from one another, and then they happen to intersect. It just feels like it's very rough plotting to me.
Can we at least agree Shuichi Ikeda is a fucking god?
Yes.
With every single line delivery?
Yeah, like the fan servicey elements of it, of, like, just Char being fucking cool as shit. Like, yes, it absolutely nails all that stuff completely.
It's good. It's, it's extra Char. At this point, it's Char, fucking hours before the TV series starts. And I just love all of that. All right. Finally, Sean, we're going to have the entire Antarctic Treaty sequence, the final montage, the close to this thing. And so there was something I wanted to share with the listeners, and I think we might as well do it here, Sean, which is that the whole Antarctic Treaty speech and a lot of what is in these two episodes 5 and 6, and obviously what they're adapted from in the Origin, a lot of that is pulled fairly directly from the original Gundam novelization by Yoshiyuki Tomino. We've talked about these on the podcast before. After the anime ended, Tomino wrote 3 novels, Awakening, Escalation, and Confrontation, that really, it would be wrong to say they retell the story of First Gundam. They sort of, like, take some of the elements, but it's mainly a different story with some of the same aspects there. But what it does do, and I've said this before, is it's kind of like a lore Bible for Gundam. Like, so much of what is in the Origin, but in a lot of other Gundam properties as well, especially in Universal Century stuff, comes out of what Tomino lays down in this book. Sometimes the details are slightly different, but a lot of it comes out of here, including this entire episode with the Antarctic Treaty. Even, actually, someone reminded me of this. We said a couple weeks ago that Sasro, the missing Zabi boy, is from an invention of the manga. He's not. He is in the book mentioned. So that is another thing that Yasuhiko pulled from the novel. So I just wanted to read a couple of pages here, Sean, and I will read just the main text, and then eventually we're going to get Revel's speech, and I thought you could read that for us. So this is a couple of pages. Will become an audiobook for a minute here, but I think it's super interesting, and if you've never read the book, maybe this will be fun to hear as we're talking about these episodes of The Origin that are essentially dramatizing this history. So there you go. So this is on page 95 of the English translation that is out now by Frederick L. Schote. Let's begin. Warfare between the Principality of Xi'an and the Earth Federation had first erupted in January UC 0079, when, 3 seconds after issuing a formal declaration of war, Xi'an threw its entire military might into an attack on sides 1, 2, 4, and 5. Each side was composed of about 40 colonies, which collectively held up to 1 billion people. So in one audacious move, the Zeon fleets nearly accomplished the unthinkable, slaughtering 4 billion people, annihilating the entire Federation forces, and forcing the Earth government to capitulate. Survivors later sarcastically referred to having a 3-second warning. Obviously, that is toned down for future stories of Gundam. That's quite a bit of killing. The tactic used to destroy the colonies was horrifyingly simple. The colony cylinders had a sealed atmosphere, so the Zeon military simply injected GG gas into them. Poisonous, colorless, and odorless, it took only 15 minutes to inject 10 tons of the gas, and in 5 hours, kill nearly 25 million people. Had Zeon forces managed to continue at this rate for 20 hours, and then immediately demanded the unconditional surrender of the Earth Federation, they probably would have triumphed. But 2 factors worked against them. First, General Revel put up a courageous struggle around Side 5, known as Loom, and successfully held off the Zeon forces there. Second, immediately after the first gas attacks, the Federation government on Earth began to put up a fierce resistance of its own. It wasn't merely because nearly 4 billion of its fellow citizens in outer space were being killed. Human psychology reacts to a more directly perceived danger. It was because Zeon also implemented its diabolical colony crash strategy, which consisted of maneuvering the dead colony cylinders into Earth orbit and then decelerating them until they plummeted towards targets on the ground. When the first colony fell on New York, the horrified people of Earth were driven to take action. Taking advantage of the fact that the Zeon forces required considerable time, energy, and large numbers of Zakus to prepare for such a massive undertaking, the Earth Federation forces regrouped and counterattacked. Unfortunately for Zeon, large numbers of Zakus were destroyed. For once, both Giran Zabi and his sister Kycilia were in fundamental agreement on the correctness of the colony crash strategy. They believed that true victory in war could not be achieved by slaughtering innocent millions with gas attacks. Rather, because they saw war primarily as a psychological process, their plan was to crash colonies into Earth's major cities until the arrogant ruling Federation elites trembled in fear. And to a certain extent, they achieved their initial objective. A month after the 1-week battle, as this first stage of the conflict came to be known, Zeon launched another attack, but General Revel had consolidated the surviving Federation ships and was again able to effectively resist. As the opposing fleets clashed in a fierce struggle between the Earth and the Moon around Side 5, the Zeon forces were disadvantaged in terms of the absolute number of ships, but they put their new mobile suits, the Zakus, to superb use and managed to annihilate most of the Federation ships. Revel's flagship was destroyed by a special team of Zakus called the Black Tri-Stars, and Revel himself was taken prisoner. It was in this same Battle of Loom that Sharaz Nabal first distinguished himself as a Zaku pilot. Zeon's supreme commander, Giran Zabi, then issued an ultimatum to the Earth Federation government, threatening to crash Luna 2 into their headquarters at Jaburo unless they surrendered unconditionally. Jaburo was the central command post of the Earth forces, located deep underground in South America, and if it were destroyed, the planet clearly would have to capitulate. Shuddering in fear, high-level Federation officials began negotiating with Zeon representatives, including Supreme Commander Giran and Rear Admiral Kycilia, at a site in Antarctica. While most felt unconditional surrender was unavoidable, they asked Giran for 10 days to debate the issue among themselves. Without waiting for their decision, Giran returned to Zeon, entrusting the rest of the negotiations to Kycilia with the advice, "The Earth Federation leadership is spineless. Be sure to take advantage of that." 3 days later, the day before the surrender treaty was to be formally signed, General Revel managed to escape and return alive to Earth, and from Jaburo he broadcast his speech, "Zeon is exhausted."
Fellow Earth Federation citizens, fellow survivors, I appeal to you all, Zeon is exhausted. It is low on troops, low on ships, weapons, and even ammunition. Why then, I ask you, should we surrender? Dear fellow citizens, our true enemy is no longer Zeon, but our own weak-kneed civilian leaders. Hiding behind some notion of absolute democracy, they are reduced to absolute indecision. Why should we, the survivors of this horrible war, entrust them with the power to make decisions for us? How can we forget the arrogance of Degwen Soto Zabi when he usurped power in Zeon? He claimed that the people of Zeon are a chosen people, that we of the Earth Federation are hidebound by archaic ways of thinking and incapable of realizing the new potential for an expanded human consciousness in outer space. That there is no need for the people of Zeon to obey an Earth Federation run by outmoded human relics. Well, fellow citizens, even though I am a member of our armed forces, I have to admit that if Degwin was referring to our corrupt Earth Federation bureaucrats, he was correct. But fellow citizens, we must not be deceived by Degwin Zabi simply because part of what he says is true. Zeon may be the side farthest away from Earth, but that is no reason to believe its leaders prattle about communing with the universe. Degwin Zabi must not be allowed to justify his version of Zeon because of corruption in one part of our Federation. His words are dogma. The dogma of a man plotting a dynasty of Zabi dictators on Zeon. Even if we do the unthinkable and recognize the existence of the Zeon dictatorship, that in no sense means we must also sink to our knees before it. The Earth Federation is a government founded on the premise of sovereign individual rights. Mankind, furthermore, was able to advance into outer space as a result of the Federation government, which is itself a crystallization of all mankind's accumulated knowledge and experience. Now, Degwin's son, Giran Zabi, says it is the weak and inept Earth Federation itself that must be destroyed. Well, let him go ahead and try. Strike at the heart of our weakness. But what right does he, who has slaughtered 4 billion innocent people, have to strike such a righteous pose? Giran Zabi tells us that mankind has violated the laws of nature by reproducing more than any other species. He tells us that mankind's population growth must be managed, because mankind must learn to inhabit the universe in harmony with nature. He tells us that the death of 4 billion people was merely expiation for our past sins against nature. Is Giran mad? What does he possibly think the human race and entire species could gain by exterminating itself? There is nothing to gain. No. Giran is a despot, trying to exterminate the very source of life that has supported and nurtured him. We of the Federation shall never comprehend the monstrosity of his actions. And now Giran threatens to crash Luna 2 onto Earth unless we surrender to him. What basis does he have for his demands? Is he in possession of some sort of absolute truth? No. He possesses nothing more than his own demented dogma. Is the entire Federation completely enfeebled, corrupt, and degenerate? Again, the answer is no. Many good, capable citizens have fought bravely against the threat from Zeon, and we are still strong and alive. So then, does Zeon actually possess an overwhelming military superiority over the Federation? Again, the answer is no. Fellow citizens, listen to what I say. Giran's threats are mere bluff. Unworthy as I am of my good fortune, I was captured rather than killed by Zeon forces, and thus was afforded the opportunity to see the Zeon nation firsthand. I therefore can assure you that the people of Zeon are exhausted, and there is no way they can possibly strengthen their forces enough to carry out their threats. So I say to you, Giran Zabi, if you think you can send Luna 2 crashing to Earth, well then, go ahead and try.
When General Revel said this on television, it was almost as if he were staring Giran Zabi straight in the eye.
Zeon's strength was expended in the Battle of Loom. There is no way they can create new soldiers overnight, and Giran Zabi knows it. I therefore appeal to all the citizens of the Earth Federation, to each and every one of you. Zeon is exhausted. Now is not the time for us to kneel before Zeon. It is time for us to rise. Now, more than ever, is our chance to defeat Zeon.
After hearing General Revel's speech, Rear Admiral Caecilia was said to have been so enraged that she tried to smash the negotiating table. An explosive shift in public opinion occurred throughout the Earth Federation, with the result that the Antarctic negotiations concluded not in surrender, but in a treaty that merely banned the use of chemical and nuclear weapons and attacks on the transport ships both sides used to ferry critical resources, particularly helium from Jupiter. After his speech, not everything went well for General Revel. Rumors swirled of a possible demotion by the Earth Federation government, but he had already become a global hero, and there was little they could do. An opportunity was thus lost. The inability of the Federation government to come up with any bold initiatives, combined with the uncompromising stance of Zeon, led to the continuation of the war, and it quickly slid into a protracted stalemate. It was almost as if too many people had already died in the conflict, almost as if, out of resentment, their souls had enveloped the world and tried to ensnare the remaining survivors. This is a really good book, Sean.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. One, I love that Tomino is such a fucking nerd, he wrote the entire speech. Like,
yes.
It is not an excerpt of the speech, it is the entire fucking speech.
Yeah, it's very good. Like, it's very, like, it's very like Roman in its following of like rules of rhetoric with like the repetition of examples of three, the ways of like using humility and stuff like that. It reminds me a lot of Mark Antony's speech in Julius Caesar and stuff like that.
It's so good. And then all of those other details that are so, like, obviously there's some stuff that's different, like all of the extra gassing of the colonies, the fact that they drop multiple colonies in that version, the whole detail about Luna 2. But then there's all these little things that Yoshikazu Yasuhiko like lifts directly, like the Black Tri-Stars destroying the Ananke, the command ship, directly, and stuff like that. Like, that is where you'll get the detail that this is where Char became the Red Comet, all of this kind of stuff. It's very cool. So much of like these episodes we've been watching, the origin of them is kind of in those pages of the novel. And of course, that speech is not delivered word for word here or anything, but many pieces of it are there. And this is the center point around which this final sequence is constructed. And I have to say, Sean, I think just in terms of like virtuoso production of a sequence, this is one of the best things in Gundam the Origin, is this final montage of Revel giving the speech. We cut to every character in the canon at this point watching it. You get the big piece of music that's called Future Warriors that I really, really like, where you get this big montage of everyone who's going to be part of the White Base crew, all get a little title card and everything. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and it's like, because the whole scene just like I think encapsulates like the full dynamics of what is happening coming into the 1 year war. In particular, like there's the two sides of it, right? There's Revel and Giran that I think are like legitimately on this like ideological fight, right? That, like as you said, like Revel at this point I think like fully understands that this is not a war that they can afford to lose or surrender, because like what that means is so ghastly and horrific that the Earth Federation has to fight. But then you also have all these people on the sides that are pushing the war forward because they profit from it. And one of my favorite moments is you have leading up to the speech on, like, you have some of the Earth Admiralty on an escalator coming down, and they're talking about it, and they know that Revel has escaped and that he's going to deliver this speech, so they know the war is going to continue. And that's where they're talking about, well, at least we can like have it be, a treaty that bans the use of chemical weapons and nuclear weapons and colony drops. And then one of the admirals just laughs and said, oh, so it's go ahead and have as much war as you like. You just have to be cleaner about it. And then he starts like, cackling about it. And it's very much, I think it captures the dynamics of what's going on here, which is there are so many people who are going to profit by the war, while it wages, misery and death on the general populations of both the colonies and the people on Earth. And they just like are kind of rooting for it on the sidelines. And then there are two people at the center of this game, Giran and Revel, that are like playing for fucking reals.
Yes, they're playing for keeps. So many other people don't realize it. You have the moment where the music actually kicks in is when you have Mirai's dad giving that speech that I quoted earlier, where he talks about how humanity hasn't taken this far enough. Regardless of what they say, people desire war, which is almost also like an interpolation of some of what's in Tomino's book there about like why this thing is continuing. It's not quite as poetic as Tomino's line about the souls around the body of the earth and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I love that with every character you cut to, you get the feeling they all know how important this moment is. From the obvious, like Sayla is cued into it, and that's how she shuts down those assholes on the ship she's with, of like, hey, this is one of the most important moments in history, do you care to listen? Down to like Kai, who's hanging out by the lake with everyone, and he is sort of uncharacteristically listening to this speech on the radio, and even Kai listening to it is like, this seems important. I love all of those little details,
Yeah, because they add in a little beat with Kai where he stops Amuro, and like tries to get Amuro to tell him about what's going on with his dad being a soldier and all of that, which I think is a nice little bit of like giving Kai a little bit of characterization that leads into him being a member of the White Base and one of the pilots on the White Base, of like there is a more serious side to his character that has always been there, and I like that they kind of put that a little bit here in the Origin, that kind of presages his line there, to his kind of like the other goons in his like biker gang or whatever the fuck they do when they're at their school with their leather jackets and shit.
I guess all those guys died on Side 7 because we never see them again.
Yeah, presumably.
Yeah. I don't know if Kai was actually that broken up about it. I actually wanted to talk about that moment. We kind of skipped over it, but the moment with Kai and Amuro I think is really good because Furukawa just goes to town on that line of like Kai kind of berating Amuro. But then I really like Toru Furia's retort where he says like, get out of the way or I'm going to run you over, basically. He says, get out of the way, it's dangerous to stand in the street like that. And I love that you have just like full proactive Amuro, which is a part of Amuro's character from the beginning. You know, he has a lethargy, but also a proactivity. It's like two sides of him. You get this whole scene where he goes to the construction sector and tries to figure out what the Gundam is, and that leads to them taking everything out of the apartment, which leads to this great moment where he's back in his dad's office, but everything's empty, and they repeat the tracking shot from when he first saw it, but now everything's empty. And I do kind of like the aspect of Amuro living in a paranoid 70s thriller for this scene.
Yes. Yeah, it's a nice little way to kind of just like close off the little like Amuro subplot they sprinkled through here. Like I think it's better done here than it has been in some of the other episodes. Like in episode 5, that sequence at the beginning felt very like superfluous, whereas here it partially because it's intersecting with this is basically the beginning of the 1-year war as we understand it, because Revel's speech is like Earth Federation is now committing to this war rather than being this sort of like passive participant that's only involved because they have interest in like basically governing the colonies because it gives them profit, whereas like now they're like, no, we're going to actually fight a fucking war with you guys, which is part of what that speech is. And so that more like I think dramatically pulls Amuro and the other characters into the action because we know where all this is going. And so it feels more like immediate and like narratively impactful to have some of this stuff here.
Yeah, and you know I don't ever need the prequelization with like Amuro learning about the Gundam. There's other bits of the prequelization I think are really really good, like particularly in the manga version, just him. All the stuff of him living his life on Side 7 is very cool to see, right? We've talked about that in previous episodes. The little grace note they give Amuro, though, I really do like, where it's his last moment in this OVA, where he is kind of distracted. He looks back at the big bulkhead, where behind that is the construction sector, and he says, on the far side of that, that's where the Gundam is, and he's kind of looking at it, and there's this little, with the music and everything, there's this obvious, like, kind of call to the destiny of it there. And, again, it's not a moment I, like, need, and it doesn't fully align with like the original anime obviously, but there's something about that I just think is a nice little grace moment to like end it. And Yasuhiko has talked about in some of the extra materials in the manga that one of the key entry point images for him in being interested in telling this story in manga form was expanding on that idea that Side 7 is this weird colony where it is really there for military tests. And so half of it is closed off and it's said it's under construction, but it's a lie. And then you have this civilization going on this other side, and there's this division. And that's an image that really compelled him. And I think it's played with in very interesting ways in Volume 1, and then in some of the flashback stuff, particularly a lot of the Amuro stuff that doesn't quite make it into the anime. And I like that call to that, because it is just a compelling image of him looking at this big closed-off side of the colony and thinking about the Gundam. It's over there, and it's a good line from Toru Furia.
Yeah, and it calls to a thing that I like, that I think is very important about the dynamic of what Side 7 is. I think is like easy to forget, which is, you know, that they're not supposed to be building anything there. That it is like against the rules of war, effectively, like the treaty. Like they're supposed to be a neutral colony, but the development of the Gundam there is the thing that gets all those people fucking killed, and like the 100 or so survivors that end up on the white base, and like ruined their entire lives. Like none of that weapon development is supposed to be going on. Is, you know, effectively illegal against the rules of like engagement for the war. So that's a thing. I think the dynamic that they sort of like reintroduce here and make more like front and center is how it ties into like the different factions that desire the war or profit by the war, and some of that is like Tim Ray and the Operation V people and their whole project about designing this mobile suit is like motivated by, we need this war to happen too, because we want our Gundam to do some shit, right? We need to profit from our weapons development. We're doing all this. We're committing so much to this, even if it is putting everyone else who lives here completely at risk if we're doing this here in secret.
Yeah. So, I mean, how well for you, Sean, does this just overall sequence work as an ending? Because it's accurate to the manga. The manga flashback ends here as well, but it ends on this quiet note of Sayla watching it on the ship 2 Side 7, and that's where it ends. And the shift the anime makes is to adapt it into this bigger, more bombastic montage where you see all of the characters key to the white base. They get their little cards. Just fantastic music by Hattori here. And it is this kind of big, rousing finale. I've always remembered this scene vividly. I think it's such a good ending to the OVA.
Yeah, I think it's very good. I mean, because it's the thing where I think finding like a way to end the OVA is a tricky thing, because it's a thing that like inherently doesn't like have an ending, because its ending is, and now the TV show happens. But I think this is the construction of the sequence itself is so moving and so effective. I think that's what pulls it off. Like if it was the same thing, but it was executed to a much like lower degree, I think it would come across more as like, it's just like fan servicey, whatever. But it's edited together and written in such a way to make it feel like there's a sweep of like thematic intent and narrative drama that connects all of these people together, that we have seen those threads being, drawn together bit by bit over the course of the origin, showing what are all the things that bring this war to fruition, and how then do Char and Sayla like factor into that. And of course, like it does ultimately have to need with addressing to some extent like the white base and those people in the Gundam, because that is where all this is eventually going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's at like at least 60% the fucking music. The music is so good.
Yeah.
It's one of the best pieces. I think my favorite piece in the Origin soundtrack is that Red Comet theme for Char, but I think my second favorite piece is this big, it's called Future Warriors. I know that because I've listened to it a million times. It's just a great piece of music that's like, it's the right kind of like rousing for, it's a pretty dark story overall, but to like, this big, classic Gundam story is about to unfurl, and I think it's very good. And I think the way this episode cuts to credits kicks so much ass.
Oh, yeah.
Where you have the Future Warriors piece wrap up with its big swell. As it finishes swelling, you cut to Revel, who has his final lines where he says, Zeon lacks for soldiers, we cannot but win. And then it's smash cut and dun 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 dun. Line Dotted Tears is a fucking great Gundam song.
Yes, yeah. Masayoshi Yamazaki is just a great musical artist. He's like a very like popular, very well-known musical artist in Japan, because I've listened to some of his other stuff, because he's done other themes for shows and things like that. And yeah, it's so good. I mean, I just love his music because it's got a very like kind of classic rock kind of influence to it that's very much in my wheelhouse. But yes, this song, it just kicks so much ass. That core like guitar riff that drives the whole song is so good. It's so catchy. And in particular, that being then put over these images of like the pods dropping with Zaku's onto Earth, and like, eventually my favorite is Garma standing in front of Hollywood.
Yes.
The Hollywood sign, which is the best, I think, addition that the Origin manga makes in taking these sort of like fake Earth locations of the original series, which has its own charm, and I love that in its own way, but making it explicitly he is in Los Angeles, like by fucking Hollywood, is so hilarious. And having that shot in the credits, while Masayoshi Yamazaki is like crooning the chorus to the song, it's the fucking best shit.
I agree with all of that. It's stuff. I mean, I've talked before about how much I love all of Yasuhiko's location work, but the whole idea of the Garma episode happening in Hollywood is something he uses. He makes such a meal out of that location. Yeah. And just having that one shot in the credits of Garma with his big goofy grin in front of the Hollywood sign is so funny. I mean, it's so many things. It's the ending with Revel's big final proclamation. We cannot but win. We must be victorious, however you want to translate that. And then it's into the guitar lick, which is sick as shit. That song it's my favorite of the 6 Gundam Origin themes. Yes. I've listened to it a million times.
100%.
Yeah, it's so good. And then you have, as the song goes along, this series of what I think are kind of alternately funny and haunting images. Funny being Garma in front of the Hollywood sign.
Yeah.
Haunting being that amazing shot of an entire city's electrical grid going out. It kind of goes back and forth. And I think this song, there's something about it that I think kind of like is thematically in keeping, even if you're not looking at the lyrics, I just mean like the music of it is thematically in keeping with the episode of like well, we're gonna have a fucking war, and let's have a fucking war, right? And we
Yeah.
see the beginning of it on Earth. Also, the song makes copious use of harmonica, and that is one reason I fucking love it. The harmonica slaps. More harmonica in songs. Harmonica is a key part of rock and roll.
Yeah, because I think one thing, like, stylistically here is that we've moved a little bit out of, like, the World War II stuff, and this is very much like a Vietnam movie kind of, like, thing that it's doing, of the, like, contrast of the horror of this war with this, like, much more, like, upbeat, like, kind of, like, energetic music. That, yeah, I think it's just, like, I'm way into, because it totally dovetails with the thematic statement of that, you know, the reason why this war is happening, or one of the main reasons why the war is happening, is because people can't help but have war because we profit by it, and so on and so forth, which, like, the Cold War is, like, the poster child of that dynamic. And the episode has made multiple references to the Cold War with the Bluebird stuff, that then bringing in this, like, Vietnam movie style musical montage over the credits with this sick guitar song. Yeah, it's fucking great. It's something that, like, it makes me want more Gundam stuff that does stuff like this, because it's a little bit, obviously we have, like, the 08 MS team has a lot of Vietnam influences, but, you know, it's like just such, like, an interesting, compelling kind of wartime aesthetic, that I like its inclusion here.
Oh, I love it. And just overall, I mean, this is such a kick-ass ending, from the montage with Future Warriors to Revel's last lines to the song kicking in to all of the, as you say, the kind of Vietnam imagery over the credits. I don't know how you don't walk out of this just unbelievably jazzed. And then you also get that post-credits scene, which is phenomenal, where you have the white bass rising with, at this point, just pure original Gundam 79 music. Not the original recording, but just, like, a very straight adaptation of it here. You have Bright. I love having Bright on the bridge here, where he's just a plucky young upstart before he has the weight of the world put on his shoulders, which we've never really seen, because Bright, by the time we meet him in Gundam 79, people are dying left and right? You know? Basically, the only scene he has where he doesn't have that pressure on him is when he gets Temray out of his room, which is, this scene sets up that he's like, I'll go get you when we land. And I also do like the captain calling him Bright Coon, because you never ever hear anyone say Bright Coon in this series.
Yeah, just getting to see that captain again is like, oh, the original white base captain, you were such a good dude. And it's like, he's like one of those guys that's just like, you hate to see go, because he's like one of the few Earth Federation people that is just like a legitimately good guy.
Yes, no, I love him. I like the last scene of Temray in his cabin. He's excited about the Gundam. There's a little bit of sentiment in that, you know, maybe he really does believe he can end the war with this. And then there's this photo of Amuro on his desk. That photo is there in First Gundam as well, but in this version it is a Yasuhiko drawing, basically lifted out of the manga.
Yeah, it basically looks like he framed one of the covers for the manga and just like put it there. It's very funny. I like it.
It's great. You fade out. On screen there is text that says, "And now, Gundam begins." And then, just to make this a perfect series, Akio Otsuka says, "Will you be able to survive?" And it's the best reading of that line in the history of Gundam, because it's Akio fucking Otsuka.
This is honestly, of like all things in Gundam the Origin, there are two things that have of like this anime adaptation. There are two things that have stuck with me forever, and it is, you know, it is Shara's whole thing of like, kneel before me, God. That's one thing that I think about all the fucking time. And, like, the whole sequence building up to that with the cockpit shaking to pieces and all that. And the other is Akio Otsuka, like, whispering into the microphone, "Kimi wa ikinobiru koto wa dekiru ka?" And just, like, I remember just my spine tingling. Like, quite literally. Not as an expression, like, actually my spine vibrated. It's just like, oh my God. Because it hit, like, a core deep inside of me that, like, honestly, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is one of the things that I think like causes a chain reaction to this podcast starting, because it is that fucking line delivery that like I had not thought about by the time I had watched this in 2 or 3 years, about the fact that at the end of every single episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, the narrator says, "Will you be able to survive?" That was just a thing that had gone from my memory, and he says it, and like I was hit by this overwhelming wave of nostalgia when I heard that is what caused me to rewatch Mobile Suit Gundam. That then me rewatching original Mobile Suit Gundam is one of the things that got me talking about Mobile Suit Gundam to you all the fucking time, that then eventually was like, oh, we should just do a podcast on it. and is like then when I rewatched Mobile Suit Gundam twice within like 6 months or whatever. So it is like this is like getting really close to when we started the podcast by the time that this thing has come out.
So the silky smooth, perfect vibrations of Akio Otsuka's God voice
Yes.
is the direct trigger for the creation of Weekly Suit Gundam, which means Akio Otsuka is our origin.
Basically, yes, yeah. It is like it's that because that line delivery is so good. Like he like understands so clearly like the weight of what this line is and what it means, and it's just such a fucking sumptuous delivery. There's so much packed into it. That yeah, it is like it was that and that feeling of like holy shit. I have to just go watch immediately, Gundam Daiichi ni Tatsu, and it's like, I just got to go there right now. And that's basically what I did, and then eventually we did this podcast.
I did it last night, too. I finished this and I watched the first 2 episodes of First Gundam, because there was just I don't know how you watch Gundam The Origin and get to the end of episode 6 and don't go watch Gundam Rising, like the first episode of Gundam. It is so hard to not do that. Because last time I watched Gundam Origin, you know what I did when we finished this? We watched the movie trilogy. Right, and that's where that came from. So, like, it is so hard for me not to go watch OG Gundam after this OVA, which I think says a lot about how good this OVA is, and that it's, like, fan service done right, goddammit. But, like, First Gundam is such a ludicrously good show that just like, oh my god, I just, even in my memory, I've said it a million times, my favorite show ever, I still sit down and watch it, I'm like, oh my god, this is so good. But yeah, like, the best possible argument that I think could be made for doing a remake of First Gundam is having Akio Otsuka as the narrator, so for however many episodes he can say this line at the end. That is maybe the best reason to do it. Because, we already have Shuichi Ikeda and Toru Furuya and everyone else doing all their great work in Original Gundam. We don't need them to do it again because they've done it. But we don't have Akio Otsuka as the narrator. But we have this one line here.
Do a different line read for every single episode.
Yes.
You don't just do one and then reuse it. He's got to give a fresh take, and everyone is a little bit different.
Yes. Get him in that booth and say, all right, Otsuka-san, we need you to read it 50 times.
Yes.
Oh my god. Sean, this series is so fucking good.
Yes, yeah, no. It is just it's Gundam candy. It's just like it's so in my first Gundam loving heart, like it is just so much fun and it's so interesting and its ability to I think both capture and explore and build on the politics and ideas and themes of Original Gundam, and then also have some of this like just complete fan servicey, have the narrator say, will you be able to survive at the end of the episode, and some of that kind of stuff. It is a true feast for Gundam fans when they made this.
It's so true. I mean, we've obviously had little quibbles along the way because we talked about every single fucking scene of this 6-episode series.
Yeah, because most of I really is when you think back to it, other than a couple of stuff in episode 4 with Lala Soon is probably like the biggest like complaint or criticism I have for it. I feel like most of the criticisms of like all the stuff I talked about in this episode that are criticisms, I don't think would be something notable enough that I would have mentioned it if we did we're talking about all of them in one like 3 to 4 hour podcast version of this conversation. Like most of the criticisms I have don't really rate on that level.
No, I think if we were doing the 1 3-hour podcast, it would be almost annoyingly effusive because there are, and it's the reason why we had to break it out into 6, is that every one of these 6 episodes has so many scenes that are just either such a great production or such a great piece of story that Yasuhiko came up with, or such a great opportunity for Shuichi Ikeda or Toru Furuya or one of the new actors to like go to town with something, or such a great invention of the OVA, like the big song number in episode 5 that you have. And sometimes it's all of those together, and it really is one of Gundam's finest hours. It's, it's not in the absolute uppermost, tier with like Turn A and Gundam 79, but it is so much higher than a prequel to Gundam should be. Like, yeah, I mean, crazy.
It's the kind of thing where, like, it's going to be weird trying to rank it because it is, like, it's one of those things where its proximity to First Gundam and it's also its reliance on First Gundam makes it, like, a thing that's weird to try to rate it in and of itself because it's so closely attached to this other thing. But yes, it's something that I think could very easily, like just the entire, like if you take a step back from it, like look at the Origin project as a whole, it's a thing that's so easy to imagine going wrong, right? The idea of doing like for the manga, doing a retelling of the original anime stuff, making some changes, and then telling this big prequel story. You know, most prequels are so like either actively destructive or just incredibly boring. And the fact that this is never either of those things, and at most it's like you have like a couple of like quibbles or like, you know, because usually it's stuff that I'm like, I like the way the anime implies the way this went, but I also like the way that this went, and so it's like more kind of like a conflict of two different versions of the thing, and I like both of them a lot. Like the level of incredible high quality that this is in and of itself, and then the way in which it builds and reflects on things from First Gundam, is so much better than you would ever expect a project like this to be. And then on top of all that, it is also, you know, for me having read the manga, I think one thing that's really interesting is looking at the OVA through the lens of like, how does it relate to the manga that it's adapted from, which I didn't have that experience the first time I watched it, is getting to see like how many incredibly smart choices were made in the production of this anime adaptation, and that it is this thing where sometimes it creates a little bit of like friction points where it can be a little bit awkward in the way it's sandwiched between two things. But I mean, any piece of like weird friction or awkwardness is always more than compensated by some choices that they make originally for the anime version of being both an adaptation of this material and more specifically a prequel to the original Gundam series, that it gets to kind of like flower as its own creation, that it's not just an adaptation to the manga. It's not just a straightforward prequel. It gets this anime gets to be very much its own thing as such a incredible adaptation and evolution of its source material.
I would absolutely agree with that. You know, I think there's things I prefer about the manga, and, you know, as a whole, there's not many things I love in this world more than Yasuhiko's Gundam the Origin manga, because it is such a virtuoso piece of work in one of my favorite mediums. But this anime comes so fucking close to nailing it in so... I mean, not just nailing it. It doesn't come close. It surpasses nailing it in so many ways. It works so well as a standalone anime. And it is a weird, difficult project when you think about it. It's this big flashback sandwiched in the middle of the manga that very much is there for a reason. And so there's a lot of things the OVA has to do to make it into these 6 sort of like short movie-length projects. And it just does it with aplomb. And throughout, I think there is a real sense of everyone at Sunrise, it being a passion project for everyone working on this. And I think particularly in these closing episodes, Sean, I really feel like there's a kind of a sense of like, maybe this is the last time we do this. Not Gundam as a whole, but I mean this slice of the Gundam universe. Like, this could be the last time we have Shuichi Ikeda in a booth doing Char in a project like this. This could be the last time we have Toru Furuya, you know, all those sorts of things. And in some cases it is and it isn't. They're doing Hathaway, which is more in the Universal Century Tomino canon. But, like, you know, there has not been another big project with Char or Amuro, and this could very well be their kind of swan song as those characters. And I feel like it really feels like they went to town on making this the right kind of, like, other end of the career Gundam work for the people who are in it, you know?
Absolutely. As well as, like, I think, like, innovating a lot of its like technical stuff with its using 3D models for the mobile suits and stuff like that we then see like that work really flourishing fully in Hathaway, as like this is like this kind of bridge to that like, you know, not to say that there's anything particularly lacking in what they do with the Origin, because it is incredibly good, but it does feel like it is them like fully figuring out how to do the 2D 3D blend stuff that has become kind of like, you know, the hot thing in modern animation, because we can do it so well now. That then all the lessons learned that Sunrise learns on this project, they then take and like push even further in Hathaway and presumably in other projects in the future.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's a great piece of Gundam that is situated at this junction point of kind of looking back and in some senses saying goodbye to the past and embracing the future in so many cool ways, you know? It's a spectacular thing. It was such a fun thing to get to break down. I'm so glad we did all 6 on their own. Yeah. This was obviously the way to do this. And it was a blast just to watch them, to talk about them, to hear listeners respond to us about them. I love this show, man.
I love it to death. But Jonathan, we are not yet quite done talking about Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin, because there is one other thing that, I mean, we obviously have spent collectively across these like probably a couple of hours talking dedicatedly about, but now we will have to do an entire episode on the manga Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin itself. I don't know how the fuck I don't know what the podcast is going to go like, because that is obviously we're not going to go one volume at a time and do a fucking half a year podcast just on doing volume by volume. We'll talk about the entire manga in its entirety, as a retrospective and kind of closing out Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin. And I'm very excited to do this, but that's what we'll have to do next week on Weekly Suit Gundam.